And so, we come to Mega Man 8.
A strange meteor has fallen to Earth just a while ago.
You must recover all the energy immediately, Mega Man.
I understand, Dr. Light.
Mega Man 8 is perhaps the most divisive of the classic Mega Man games. There's a camp of players who hated the changes made for 8, but there's a collection of players who find it to be their favorite. As such, it was actually really interesting replaying the game. And you know what? While I wasn't the biggest fan of 8 when I was a kid, I realized that Mega Man 8 tried a lot of new things and actually has some pros to it that I quite like and have come to really appreciate. For those of you just joining me, this is my 8th video diving deep into the design of all of the classic Mega Man games, so I won't be re-exploring mechanics I already discussed unless something changed. So, let's start the game and see what Mega Man 8 is all about. Mega Man 8 is unique in that it would be the first Mega Man game released exclusively on 32-bit consoles, and was the first Mega Man game to truly make the jump from 16-bit, releasing to Japan in December 1996, almost a full year before Mega Man X4 would release, and a full year before Mega Man Legends would release. In spite of the 3D technology the Sega Saturn, Sony PlayStation, and N64 would introduce to the 32-bit era, Mega Man 8 was still 2D pixel art, but with far more detail as the new systems allowed for it. Hayato Kaji, who had been working on Mega Man games ever since Mega Man 4 and had started as an object designer, commented, "I did the dots for Grenade Man and Sword Man. Now that we were moving into the PlayStation, they wanted us to make the most of its greater hardware capacity by doing more variations and such. Easy for them to say when they're not the ones doing the actual work." And speaking on Hayato Kaji, behind the scenes, there was a major shakeup with Mega Man 8. Keiji Inafune, who had regularly been the main visual designer, instead found himself as a producer on Mega Man 8. He states, "With new hardware came new responsibilities. Up to 7, my main duty was always drawing, but for 8, I found myself squarely in the role of a producer. I even had to take the train to the studio when we were putting in animations." Kaji was at the center of 8. In other words, my student was finally out there on his own. This allowed me to take a very different approach to creating a Mega Man game, seeing Mega Man from a distance, I guess you could say. So while Keiji Inafune would produce Mega Man 8 alongside Bamboo, or Yoshinori Takenaka, Hayato Kaji would be upgraded to director on Mega Man 8. There's not too much else I'm aware of behind the scenes that would majorly affect Mega Man 8, but there is an interesting quote translated by the Reploid Research Lavatory from Inafune Remembers Rockman, where he specifically remembers in regards to Mega Man 8, "Anime, new hardware, and PlayStation/Sega Saturn synchronized releases. All this unfamiliar new territory got to be pretty overwhelming at times." So, as Mega Man 8 was released to both Sega Saturn and PlayStation, with them having some slight variations, it seems like this at times caused internal issues, as I'm sure programming for the two systems was very different, and they likely had different limitations. Booting up Mega Man 8, after the title cards, Mega Man 8 does something completely new for the series thanks to the new power from CD-ROMs and 32-bit consoles, with a fully animated intro. While the animation is nice, probably the largest aspect to this change is that we don't get any story from the title card intro sequence, which had become the standard of previous Mega Man games. Instead, it's a montage of Mega Man fighting off robot masters from previous titles, and acts more so as an intro to hype up players. There's no correct way to do this, but if I had to put my finger on which one I think I prefer, I probably prefer to get a little story alongside my cutscene, although nothing wrong with having a little bit of hype to start you out from the jump. There's also the issue of if the intro is something important to the story and it's played before the title card, players might skip past it not realizing it's a crucial bit of story, so that's certainly a perk to a fun hype opening rather than a story-based opening here. Any longtime Mega Man fan will also appreciate that the sequence shows Mega Man fighting off against one robot master from each game, and in sequence, which is pretty cool to see. I especially love the idea that Snake Man rides snake robots to attack Mega Man. Another thing Mega Man fans will probably notice is that at the end of the title sequence, we see a card with not only the major secondary characters of Proto Man and Bass, but a new character to mainline Mega Man in Duo in the back, hinting at what's to come in Mega Man 8. One more note on this is that the Japanese and English songs differ significantly, with the Japanese intro song even including vocals. I think that helps a lot with this animation montage, as watching it feels a little empty to me without the vocal backing. With that, we come to the title screen of Mega Man 8, and something brand new and exciting players will notice: a continue option. The title screen also includes speed lines in the background, adding a nice bit of momentum to it compared to some of the more bland title screens of the former classic games. Coming back around to the continue option, for the first time ever in a Mega Man game, Mega Man 8 allows players to save their progress and load it back up without needing to use a password. While the previous games were able to get away with the password system as they were fairly short and players could finish a game in one session without always needing a password, Mega Man 8 is definitely longer than any of the previous games, so it definitely feels necessary here to me. Even so, I'm sure the saving system of Mega Man 8 is really thanks to the CD-ROM format of the Sega Saturn and PlayStation. While saving games were possible all the way back to the NES, I mean, how else would you play and finish a JRPG grindfest? It cost extra money per cartridge to include saving, as those cartridges need to have an extra battery-backed RAM included. As such, during the 8-bit and 16-bit era, saving was typically limited to games that absolutely needed it, even if it might have been a nice quality of life feature, like in the Mega Man series. But with CD-ROMs, the onus was suddenly on the player to purchase a memory card, meaning game manufacturers could freely add save features onto their games without any added costs. So it's likely this is what led to saving in Mega Man 8. And all around, it's definitely an overall positive, and nice to see a save system here with 3 save slots. Something I do wonder though, is that all of the stages in Mega Man 8, to me, feel longer than any of the previous games. There are also several upgrades players can purchase, and a lot of retraversing through stages players had already beaten in order to collect missed bolts if players want to 100% the game, or at least really level up their character. This isn't necessarily that far off from what Mega Man X would do, which doesn't include a save system, but I do wonder if the added use of saving made the team feel a little more free to increase the overall length players will spend in the game. While a password system still allows for this, it can be such a hassle for players to write down passwords and re-input them, it could have led to some reservation in increasing the length of a game too much. We don't have save data, so let's start the game. Instead of gameplay, we begin with an anime cutscene, essentially introducing the new space robot of Duo. Now, technically, Duo made his first appearance in 1996's arcade fighting game, Mega Man 2: The Power Fighters. I don't think this one was ever released outside of Japan, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong though, so Mega Man 8 is likely going to be most players' first time seeing Duo. Mega Man 8 released to Japan in December 1996, and outside of Japan in 1997, so it wasn't much longer before anyone would meet Duo, for that matter. I don't want to discuss the story too much here, because really this is a video about game design. For my part, while I appreciate this not being about Dr. Wily yet, the premise is kinda ridiculous even for a Mega Man game. The introduction of Duo being a super-powered robot from outer space who fights evil energy that can take over the world is even more off the rails than a normal Mega Man premise. And I'll only say it here and once, as I don't want to complain too much, but I strongly dislike the version of Mega Man we see here. He's lacking any of the cool factor I think Mega Man has in previous games, especially the intro to MM4. Damn, dude.
Hey, Zach! Why must I fight you? We are not enemies!
It just makes me sad. In general, the English dub is terrible. Hilariously so, in fact.
You must recover all the energy immediately, Mega Man.
But that doesn't really affect the gameplay. While I'm not the biggest fan of the storyline here, I will say that it is nice to get a story set up to the gameplay and an introduction to what players will be doing in the Prologue Stage. I definitely prefer this over the non-existent intro to Mega Man 3, And hey, even though I think the plotline is ridiculous, at least it's not Dr. Wily taking over the world again. Yet. After the anime cutscene, like Mega Man 7 before it, we jump into an intro stage. You're given an ability pretty much right off the bat, and that being basically a soccer ball that you can kick, which right away introduces a really interesting new mechanic to Mega Man. For the first time ever, with Mega Man 8, when you have a new Mega Man ability equipped, like the boss ability, you still shoot normally with the attack button. Instead, another button is designated to using your ability that's equipped. This means you don't have to flip back and forth between the pause menu all of the time if you don't want to waste your valuable boss ability resources. And I think this change is great. It's one of those changes that makes so much sense that when you have it, you start to think, why wasn't this always the case? I mean, with Mega Man's 1 through 6, there were only so many buttons on the NES, as in 2, but with Mega Man 7 and the X series on the SNES, I guess they hadn't thought of it yet, but I think this change is fantastic. In fact, I probably would have used boss abilities more often if this was standard to all of the Mega Man games. While I am a fan of this change, it does make a pretty big gameplay difference. Or at least, it can, and it's something I'd expect any game designer to deeply think about when creating enemies and enemy wave patterns. Because you can default to your normal pellet shot while having an ability equipped, you can basically use the abilities as special power shots whenever you need. In previous games, it's such a hassle and takes so long to switch from one ability, then back to the pellet and back to another ability that you want to use. It's highly unlikely a player would think in critical moments, I'm going to shoot 3 pellets here, then swap to the fire sword to quickly melee one enemy, then swap back to my pellets for 4 long distance attacks, then turn around, fire sword melee an enemy, turn around and shoot some more. I mean, sure, someone could do this, but with the amount of pause swapping, or rapid L and R swapping in the case of Mega Man 7, I highly doubt most people would. But now that's something you can do here. I still don't really play that way, maybe because I became such a Mega Buster only person, or maybe because of how infrequently I play Mega Man 8, but I think that it's cool you can, and it opens up a lot of possibilities for ways to tackle each stage. Another thing you'll likely come across in this intro stage is a bolt, just like the bolts from Mega Man 7. However, while bolts are an unlimited money resource in Mega Man 7, instead, bolts here are limited resources relegated to extra challenges in each stage that you can use to unlock extremely valuable upgrades to Mega Man. Similar to how previous games used extra lives and E-tanks to entice players into trying super difficult segments of levels or go off the beaten path, now bolts are used instead, and in the exact same way. In a way, this is a more modern game design approach, as 1-ups and lives have begun to be looked down upon by many as outdated. So, what can your bolts buy you this time around? Well, there are various upgrades to your Mega Buster you can choose between, like a beam that shoots out or an arrow shot, an ability that prevents Mega Man from being knocked back by enemy hits, which will help prevent you from accidentally being pushed by an enemy into an endless pit, or even starting each stage with 4 lives if you want that extra boost. Around halfway through the game, you'll unlock even more skills you can purchase for Mega Man, with some of these being especially powerful. Things like shooting triple pellets with every shot, or probably the most clutch of all, charging your Mega Buster much faster. These definitely add a feel of progression, and like you're building up Mega Man, becoming faster and stronger. Of all of the new ideas in Mega Man 8, I think this one is the most interesting. While I definitely appreciate the simplicity of the earlier games, this was definitely a fun way to change things up, and once again, allow for more replayability, as you can choose a different upgrade progression for Mega Man as you complete the game, or no upgrades whatsoever. Back to the intro stage, let's talk a little bit about something returning players might notice right away, and that's Mega Man's movement. Upon playing the intro stage, something I immediately noticed was that Mega Man 8's rock feels extremely slow and sluggish. It's not that he isn't responsive, he is. Something about his animation or actual speed feels like you're moving at a snail's pace compared to previous games. Part of this is due to Mega Man's sprite size. Mega Man is pretty big here compared to the NES Mega Man games, but slightly smaller than the Mega Man 7 sprite. So, like in Mega Man 7, enemy sprites and platforming will be affected by the sprite size, with their size also needing to increase. Because the action is more zoomed in, but Mega Man moves across the screen at the same speed, it makes him feel slower. I talked about sprite sizes quite a bit in my Mega Man 7 video, so I don't want to repeat too much here, but what I found when comparing Mega Man 8 to both the NES and SNES Mega Man sprites is that it takes 9 3/4 NES Mega Mans to fill a screen. It takes 6 3/4 Mega Man X's to fill a screen, it takes 5 3/4 Mega Man 7s to fill a screen, and it takes 6 Mega Man 8s to fill a screen. By this alone, it would make Mega Man 7 feel the slowest because he's the largest. But I think Mega Man 8 feels more sluggish than 7, and I know I'm not alone in that, as it's a common criticism leveled at Mega Man 8. So, even though he's slightly smaller in 8 compared to 7, why does he feel slower? Well, Video Game Animation Study has a great video on the animation of Mega Man, and he touches on this in his video. According to him, he attributes much of this due to the fact that Mega Man 8 has so many more frames to its animation, which it certainly does have. Another factor also has to do with how the animation itself is handled, regardless of the number of frames. Looking at his jump, for example, it feels slower because the animation isn't a sudden whip to a jump like prior games, but a drawn-out animation. I think sprite size, animation frames, and how those frames are handled are all contributing factors. But I think there's another major factor at play here, and one that he briefly touches on. As he briefly points out, the camera of Mega Man 8 is shifted, so we're no longer getting a 2D view of the background, but rather a 3/4 view. And this is something I talked about with Alan, the artist for the game I'm working on, and he pointed out to me just how much of a major factor this is. His point was this: if you ride in a car that's lower to the ground, it feels like you're going faster than the car that's high up, simply because you're able to see more. It reminds me of how, when I was visiting Japan, I like to watch the Shinkansen fly by in front of me when it wasn't stopping, specifically staring straight ahead because it looked like an absolute blur that was flying at an unbelievable speed. But if I were to shift my angle so I could view more of the Shinkansen, it wouldn't appear to move as quickly as when I was staring straight ahead. So bringing this example back to Mega Man 8, seeing straight ahead in the prior Mega Man games is like my example of staring straight ahead at the Shinkansen while rotating up so I can see more automatically makes it feel slower, and is essentially what Mega Man 8 is doing. The reason for this new point of view was probably in order to help showcase the better 32-bit graphics, as it also allows the team to give a lot more interesting detail to the tiles Mega Man is running on, but that in and of itself is a bit of a compromise. If players see a tile set that is completely flat at the top, and the player is running on that flat surface, it might not visually look as striking as a slightly 2.5D view, but it will immediately indicate where platforms begin and end. And if a game is about tight platforming where a few pixels could send players to their doom, it can definitely be frustrating if players don't fully understand where the edge of a platform begins and ends, or where the top of a platform they're trying to jump on starts. But then that trade-off is that, again, it's easier to make what the player is actually running on look more visually interesting if there's a bit of an angle to it. I still think you can have gorgeous fully 2D tile sets. I mean, Hollow Knight and Castlevania Symphony of the Night are great examples of that, and ultimately, part of it is going to be an artistic choice. But I do think there is that potential gameplay trade-off. Now, there are ways to still try to make it obvious for a player where the portion of the platform they'll be interacting is, and Mega Man 8 typically uses shading to do that, with the section of the platform Mega Man will be jumping onto typically having a distinct separate shade, which is similar to how 3D platform games will oftentimes use shadows under the character to help players understand where they really are in relation to what platform they're going to be jumping on. Generally speaking, I think I have a preference for fully 2D tile sets rather than this 2.5D camera angle, but it's really just that. It's a preference, and you might absolutely love this artistic choice. As far as how much it affects the gameplay, I think it really depends on how accurate players need to be with their jumping. There are a few segments in Mega Man 8, like in Tengu Man stage, where this definitely could have a negative effect for players, but I think for the most part in Mega Man 8, it probably has a pretty minor effect on the platforming overall. But I'd love to know if you notice, positive or negative, and what your takeaway was. Another interesting change-up to Mega Man 8 comes in the form of its charge shot. While it acts the same as previous games, something you might notice is that it actually takes a little longer to charge up in Mega Man 8 than it does in Mega Man 7, which was longer than it takes to charge up in any of the NES games. That means that MM8's charge shot takes longer to charge than any prior Mega Man game. So, how does it impact the game? Well, in the case of Mega Man 7, the charge shot only dealt 2 damage instead of 3 damage, like in the NES games, and bosses had far longer iframes than before. All of this meant that boss weaknesses, which dealt 4 damage to bosses, were far more effective than the charge shot. Because of the iframes, it balanced the charge shot in a way that made it more effective against bosses than the P-shooter, but due to the damage output, less effective than a boss weakness. In Mega Man 8, interestingly, boss iframes are actually slightly less long than in Mega Man 7, albeit still longer than boss iframes from the NES titles. As far as damage is concerned, it's harder for me to specifically check this thanks to the new lack of health bar sections in Mega Man 8, so I'm trusting the damage chart from the Mega Man knowledge base. Generally speaking, outside of Tengu Man and Aqua Man, the P-shooter deals 1 damage, a fully charged shot deals 3 damage, and for the first time ever, sometimes, a partially charged shot deals an in-between amount at 2 damage. Typically, although not always in Mega Man 8, the boss weakness deals 4 damage. Similar to Mega Man 7, the boss weakness also tends to have the perk of having a unique stunning effect on the boss, although it's not always as drastic as in Mega Man 7. All of this together has a similar effect to Mega Man 7, where boss weaknesses are still king over a charge shot, but a charge shot will be the better option over the P-shooter. On top of that, while the base charge shot takes longer, if you purchase the charge shot speed upgrade, the charge shot takes less time to charge than even the NES Mega Man games. So I think this is probably the real reason Mega Man 8's charge shot takes longer than in Mega Man 7, in order to give this upgrade both purpose and make it so it's noticeably better. The fact the base charge shot takes so long now is also likely the reason the team decided to make it so a mid-charge will sometimes deal an in-between amount of damage. Another rather interesting change-up in Mega Man 8 is in how the knockback of Mega Man functions. Anytime Mega Man is hit in any of the Mega Man games, as part of his get hit state, he'll lose some health, be knocked backwards, and then become invincible for a limited amount of time, which is typically referred to as invincibility frames or iframes. But ever since the NES Mega Man games, and this includes Mega Man 7 on the Super Nintendo, Mega Man's knockback wouldn't just send him backwards, but if players were in the air, he would lose his vertical momentum and begin falling. This is what made traps like the up and downs of Mega Man 4 so dangerous. One hit would result in the player being knocked back to their doom. Mega Man 8, however, changes this pretty notably. Whenever Mega Man is hit, he's only knocked back on the X-axis and he'll freeze on his Y position. What this means is that if players are knocked back in midair, they won't start dropping until the knockback is complete. This gives an ample amount of time for players to recover from the knockback and actually fall and return to safety once the knockback is complete. Take these examples here. In this footage from Dustman Stage in Mega Man 4, Mega Man is knocked back by the up and down, which causes him to automatically fall to his doom. However, in this footage from Grenade Man Stage of Mega Man 8, Mega Man is knocked back by a very similar enemy, the Ururuun. However, here, thanks to the new knockback, I'm easily able to guide Mega Man back to safety. It's a change that, overall, makes Mega Man 8 easier than its predecessors, and that's even disregarding the fact that players can also purchase an upgrade that completely nullifies any knockback whatsoever. Part of me wonders if this change was due to the knockback upgrade. If you purchase an upgrade that makes it so Mega Man isn't knocked back when he's hit, but you're hit in mid-air, you'll still fall to your doom. If anything, in this example of the Ururuun, having no knockback might actually make you more likely to fall to your doom, as having some knockback could hit you back into safety. One way around this, if the team wanted to have the upgrade but keep Mega Man's knockback working the same as previous games, would be to make it so the backwards knockback is only nullified if Mega Man is standing on the ground. That way, players couldn't be pushed to their death, but it might still feel odd and inconsistent if they aren't knocked backwards while standing on the ground, yet are knocked backwards while in the air. So my guess would be this change was made to accommodate for a fair way to include this knockback upgrade. But it's definitely possible it was a change up to help ease up the difficulty of Mega Man 8, or perhaps there's some totally different factor at play here, like simply the designer's preference. For my part, I think I prefer how the knockback feels in the prior Mega Man games, as I think it feels a little weird to be knocked straight back in the air and have no effect from gravity. Plus, I happen to like the added challenge of obstacles being more dangerous in mid-air sections with a normal knockback. Okay, that was a lot of basic mechanic changes. While there are still more to go over, I'm going to leave those for as I progress to them. For now, we're here in Mega Man 8's Prologue Stage. The Prologue Stage takes place on a skull-shaped island where a meteor fell from outer space. And, not surprisingly, Dr. Wily had set up a base at this skull-shaped island. Visually, this is an interesting background with a cool island landscape and discarded robot junk, like this cool dragon robot. As I mentioned in my Mega Man 7 video, a prologue stage like this is really meant to serve as one or both of two purposes. Either teach the player mechanics and how to play the game, or set up the story in some way. While Mega Man 7 slightly dabbled into teaching the player how to play, but kinda missed the mark by not forcing players to slide, Mega Man 8 has a better introductory stage as it really does introduce quite a number of new mechanics. Before that though, the stage first starts with a palm tree robot that serves as a simple obstacle. Returning players won't think much of this other than, hell yeah, palm trees are the best! You love to see it. Because everyone is exactly like me and loves all things tropical. But beyond being a fun little obstacle, it does serve as the perfect introduction for new players on how to shoot. It doesn't attack players, it looks natural to the environment, and really is just there for that basic idea that someone brand new won't know anything about Mega Man or the controls, so they'll be forced to press buttons until they figure it out. Immediately afterwards is a hidden turret that will pop out from beneath the palm tree. It's an easy enemy and therefore a good introduction to needing to shoot while dodging attacks at the same time, although shooting its cannonball will destroy its projectile, so players don't really need to jump. Shortly after is a slightly more complicated enemy of Bunby Tank DX. It's not that difficult, but it does move, and shooting its base will make the head helicopter away. So a little bit of a ramp up, and that to defeat this enemy, players will be needing to not just shoot, but jump and shoot. The medal afterwards will teach players that some enemies can be shielded. After this nice introduction to the basic gameplay, Dr. Light will give players the Mega Ball, which will be immediately equipped the moment it's introduced. While boss abilities are nothing new to Mega Man, by introducing the concept here, right in the prologue stage, new players will know this is something to look out for. At the same time, depending on what button players use to shoot, they may be introduced to the concept here that they can both shoot and use boss abilities at the same time. If players don't have a boss ability equipped, the top and bottom button will let players jump, while the left and right buttons let players shoot the Mega Buster. However, with the boss ability equipped, the right button is reallocated to be the boss weapon, while the left button remains the Mega Buster. As someone who prefers using the bottom button to jump and the left button to shoot, this really serves as the perfect in-game tutorial for how to use a boss weapon. Shooting normally, for me, doesn't do anything, but by playing around on the controller, you'll find the right button uses the boss ability, really introducing this new concept that you can shoot the Mega Buster while a boss ability is equipped. It's also great for someone like myself, who always preferred to play Mega Buster only, because for players like me, you're put into a situation right away where you'll learn that you can still use the Mega Buster, meaning players like me who might have ignored boss abilities might now choose to play around with them thanks to this new mechanic. It is worth noting then a critique I have with this. While I do love this introduction to the concept, the fact that players can use the Mega Buster with the right button while boss abilities aren't equipped does mean that some players might never realize the left button is always allocated to shooting the Mega Buster. It's a bit of a conundrum, because for the sake of trying to be as open to different player preferences as possible, it's always good to have different control schemes, but by doing so, some players might miss a key new feature. I think this is one of those cases where I might have left the right button to only be boss abilities, therefore ensuring all players learn that left button equals Mega Buster and right button equals boss ability. But there's definitely an argument to be had for both sides. Immediately after the introduction to boss abilities, players will be forced into opening a switch to an optional underground area. From a gameplay standpoint, things will be different about Mega Man 8. While Mega Man 7 did really up the amount of optional secrets, Mega Man 8 is telling players through this there are going to be secrets they need to watch out for, and the fact that this is introduced in the Prologue stage is significant in that it's telling players to look out for this, meaning it's going to be more prevalent. So far, this Prologue stage is off to a great start in that it quickly introduces mechanics and pretty immediately moves on, keeping up a good pace. If players do choose to go into the optional area, they'll be introduced to the brand new swimming mechanics of Mega Man 8. Unlike previous games where Mega Man would jump higher when underwater, Mega Man now has a specific swim state. But I'll touch more on that once we reach Aqua Man. Either way, it's fun to see the mechanic introduced here. There are a number of secret bolts here players can discover, but even if they miss them, there is an unmissable bolt at the exit, so either way, players will learn that they'll be rewarded for exploring. Players are also introduced to these party balls, which typically carry a random useful item. All of this sets up a mostly fantastic Prologue stage in terms of teaching player mechanics. But, oddly, the two most complex mechanics of Mega Man's moveset are never required, and therefore, new players may not learn to use them during this stage, charging and sliding. It would be pretty simple to introduce both. Have an enemy, like this snail, blocking the path who requires a charge shot to defeat. Then, for sliding, it's as simple as creating a wall where players are required to slide. I do think those are glaring omissions, particularly the slide, as any button combo, like holding down and pressing jump, isn't necessarily an intuitive thing for new players, and especially newer players to video games in general. Mega Man 7's intro also fails to introduce both of these mechanics, by the way, and I'm equally critical of that if there's going to be an introductory stage like this. While Mega Man's mechanics are definitely basic, there was clearly an attempt here to properly introduce players to various ideas present in Mega Man 8, which is all well done, so the two most arguably complex mechanics are a weird omission. Mechanics aside, the Prologue stage also serves as a nice story introduction to Mega Man 8. By the end, we understand that the goal is to collect the dark energy before Dr. Wily can, and while I don't mind some of this being handled via cutscene, it is nice to get some in-game storytelling. One mechanic I briefly touched on that's new to Mega Man 8 and introduced via the Prologue stage are these party balls. Party balls come in two sizes, small or large, and will carry a random item that typically helps Mega Man, whether this be a health recharge or energy recharge. A big party ball can also contain a metal SV or a small party ball, but those are definitely more rare, and in recording 3 different run-throughs, I only ran into each instance of these happening once. To my mind, a party ball isn't really too much different to simply placing a health or energy item for players along the stage, as we typically see in Mega Man games, but really serves as a way for the developers to place a drop wherever they want without needing to worry about what platform it might be near as the party balls hover in the air. Really, mechanically, they're pretty similar to the question mark blocks of Mega Man 3 or Eddie of Mega Man 4 and beyond, but much quicker and without players being able to re-attempt to get a better item out of them. To that end, similar to the question mark blocks of Mega Man 3, I think they're a nice additional mechanic for recovering an item, and the RNG of it can add a bit of fun for struggling players if they get lucky with the drop. At the end of the Prologue stage, players will reach a giant crab robot, the Yadokargo, and our first boss. I know I criticized the Prologue stage for not introducing players to the slide or charge shot, and I'm guessing that this is where the team expected players to learn these mechanics. The Yadokargo has a jump where the slide will really help players to avoid it, and the charge shot will help defeat the Yadokargo, but here's the thing. The Yadokargo can be killed by only jumping, shooting the pea shooter, and running with no need to slide. And that's not a criticism, by the way. This is the first boss, and it should be easier. But it really does play into my overall critique of the Prologue stage that these mechanics aren't taught to brand new players. And look, I get you could read the manual, but if you're going to introduce a Prologue stage that teaches mechanics, brand new players is something that should be kept in mind. Beyond that, this boss is truly weak to the Mega Ball, which will also flip open its shell. It's a nice showcase of just how much boss abilities can help against bosses, and that it's not just their weakness, but can also stun them. At the same time, I like that this weakness isn't necessary, so players can still attempt a Mega Buster only run if they like. The Mega Ball is both the quicker and smarter way to defeat the boss, but that flexibility in playstyles is something that's always been a positive of the Mega Man series. I also think, in general, this boss has a fun visual design outside of its gameplay. For defeating the Yadokargo, surprise surprise, Dr. Wily is back. He's gathering evil energy, so you need to stop him. Although it's not explicitly stated here, as you end up traveling to various bosses who have evil energy in them, it seems like this is the current plan of action. Meanwhile, you also find Duo's crashed body, so Dr. Light takes him back to the lab to help save him. It's quick, but a nice and simple introduction to the plot. Something I failed to mention earlier are these nicely animated character profiles that attach to their speech bubbles. It's a different style from Mega Man 7, which was straight-on speech bubbles, and it looks great, especially Dr. Wily here. These are two very different UI choices for the game, and it's really going to come down to a subjective choice in terms of what you might prefer. Without the profile shot, it makes things feel a little more in-game rather than like cutscenes, whereas I think adding this profile shot makes this sort of dialogue feel a bit more like you're watching something rather than participating. It does, of course, also allow for the artist to present players with a little more detail on the characters. After speaking with Wily, we make it here to the stage select, which is host to a whole slew of notable things. Visually speaking, this is probably the greatest departure we've gotten for the classic Mega Man series. It reminds me a little bit of Mega Man 5 for the Game Boy, where players are selecting their robot masters from across a planet screen. It's also a little more akin to the Mega Man X series, where you get to see the location of the bosses you're going to be battling against. While I like the simplicity of the NES Mega Man games, I also happen to really love getting to see where various robots are on a map, and this is the type of upgraded stage select screen that I happen to really like. Maybe it's because I'm someone who likes maps a lot, whether it be a game where you're making your own map, like in Etrian Odyssey, or when you get to see a map of a fictional location in a book you're reading. It really adds a lot for me. Either way, I don't necessarily think you need the extreme simplicity of the original NES Mega Man games' stage select. It served its purpose for the time, and as long as the stage select is simple and clean, where players will understand what they're choosing, there's a lot of room for growth, and I actually think this is a good example of that. The only real downside you're getting, visually speaking, with the Mega Man 8 stage select, is that the profile pictures of the bosses are much smaller than those of the previous games. But the trade-off is that you get to see where the locations of each stage are, and you get to see a nice blown-up image of the stage you'll be traveling to on the right side of the screen. The boss who's selected also shows up on the bottom right of the stage, and there's a fun speedline and tile pattern that's animated as part of the background. While the character portraits fade out once the boss is defeated, as they're smaller, that's a little less obvious than in previous games, where defeated bosses' selection screens would turn black, or Mega Man 7, where the boss profile pictures are faded, but also so much larger. So, to account for that, the animation of the boss sprite that appears on the bottom right will no longer appear if a boss is defeated, which is a nice additional touch to very clearly show players which stages they finished and which they haven't. On top of that, while Mega Man 7 had a UI issue with nothing visually indicating how players could enter the shop, here we get a very clear stage select button for entering the shop, Dr. Light's face. It's also nice that players can revisit the prologue stage if they choose. This choice was probably made because there are missable bolts in the prologue stage, but even if not, it might be fun for some powered up players to return to an earlier stage like that just to wreak havoc. The one major downside to the stage select in Mega Man 8 is that it chooses to carry over what's, in my opinion, one of the worst changes in the series from Mega Man 7, only 4 starting robot masters players can choose from instead of the full roster of 8. At the very least, Mega Man 8 does have a far better justification for it though. It's a pretty drastic change, and thus, I'm giving it its own section. While Mega Man 7 toyed with the idea of requiring boss abilities in order to unveil different secrets, Mega Man 8 continues that concept and brings it along to the next phase of its natural evolution. For the first time in a mainline Mega Man game, certain boss weapons are absolutely required for traversal. However, the way that Mega Man 8 splits this up is there are 4 boss weapons that are required to complete certain stages, and 4 boss weapons that are purely offensive. So the first 4 stages we see and can attempt are stages where players will be obtaining traversal aiding weapons. In particular, Clown Man's Thunderclaw and Tengu Man's Tornado Hold. These boss weapons aren't required to complete any of the first 4 stages, but can sometimes be used to access various hidden bolts. The second set of 4 stages requires players to, at various times, use some of these abilities for traversal and to complete the stage. The boss weapons players will find in these stages can still be used for certain secret bolts, but are never required for completing a stage. It's definitely an interesting change-up, and one that will immediately create a rift amongst the player base, amongst those who love this concept and those who hate it, with, obviously there being people somewhere in the middle of those extremes. On the positive side, it's another way to look at Mega Man's weapons. There have been weapons that can aid in traversal to an extent before, like Flashman's Time Stopper helping with traversal, or the various rush abilities of previous games very specifically being traversal-based tools, although rarely being required before the Dr. Wily stages. Now that Mega Man can use both a weapon and boss weapon at the same time, it makes using these far more convenient and allows the developers to create more interesting challenges that we've never seen before in a Mega Man game. Astro Man stage is a bit of a puzzle stage, and players will want to use the Tornado Hold to help reach greater heights and help solve the puzzles. Search Man stage frequently requires players use the Thunderclaw to create swinging-based challenges. The first half of Sword Man stage is a set of different puzzle challenges, with each room requiring a different boss weapon in order to complete the challenge. Aqua Man stage doesn't require anything, but it's not like every one of these stages has to. Point being, it allows the devs to vary the gameplay, and for a series that's on its 8th iteration, that's not necessarily a bad thing. On the negative side, we do once again get this 4-stage boss sequence before a second 4-stage boss sequence, really limiting the non-linear aspect of Mega Man, and limiting the replayability a little bit due to that. Unlike Mega Man 7, where I don't think there was any real good justification for doing this, Mega Man 8 had to do this due to his choice of making boss weapons required for certain stages. It would be ridiculous if all of the stages here were accessible right off the bat, and for a player to enter Swordman stage only to find they're completely blocked from being able to complete the stage. So, as with many things I talk about, there are pros and cons to this choice, and it's going to come down to player preference for what you prefer. I think it's important to preface with this statement before I give my personal thoughts and personal take. For my part, I really do like the concept a lot. I think it's one of those fresh takes that helps really justify another Mega Man game, rather than just redoing the same thing all over again. At the same time, I think this could have been done better. A lot of the challenges that require the boss abilities aren't too interesting, and I think if this was going to be the choice that was made, I would have rather seen the second half of the stages really go all in with interesting challenges that use the boss weapons from the first half of the game. The way it's handled in Mega Man 8 comes across a bit more like a proof of concept, and I'm not sure if the extent the boss weapons were used really justify cutting off letting players choose 8 bosses at the get-go. If I were to give you what I think would be my ideal Mega Man 12, as I'm writing this before Mega Man 12 has been announced or anything like that, I think I'd say that this is a cool concept, and I'd probably want something that merges this idea with Mega Man 3. So, we get 8 bosses, like normal, who have interesting abilities that can be used for traversal or as offensive weapons. Then, after finishing those 8 stages, 4 new stages are introduced, similar to the Doc Robot concept of Mega Man 3, with 4 Robot Masters who give Mega Man an additional 4 powerful offensive-only weapons. These 4 new stages would all really dive into the idea of making players use these boss abilities for traversal. Either that, or as I'm a sucker for Metroidvania games, it would be interesting to see classic Mega Man fuse with the Metroidvania in some ways. I haven't played ZX by the way, but when I say that, I mean something more akin to The Messenger, which starts with no Metroidvania elements, but then introduces some light Metroidvania elements with the game secretly interconnecting as players earn boss weapons in the case of Mega Man. Anyways, all of that said, this is one of those choices I've really grown to appreciate more and more as time passes. I'm not sure I really cared or thought too deeply about it when I first played Mega Man 8, to be honest, but looking back now, it was a huge risk considering how much it really differs from what Mega Man had been in the past, and I appreciate the team for taking this risk. Let's choose our first boss. I always like to choose Clown Man first because, well, I never really liked clown stuff, and I always wanted to get his level over with for that reason. Choose Clown Man, and we'll see a somewhat similar boss select screen to previous games, but with a slightly new twist. Rather than the boss bar sliding across the screen, like in Mega Man 7, the boss bar window opens up from nothing, with the boss flashing into view similar to Mega Man 5. As the boss does their fun pose, we get speed lines like in Mega Man 7, but instead of flying across the screen, the speed lines imply a forward momentum. It's a decent enough attempt to slightly alter this now standard boss intro screen, although I'm not sure if I agree with their color combo choice for the speed lines. So here we are at our first true stage of Mega Man 8, Clown Man. The very start of the stage introduces a little bit more of an atmospheric idea to Mega Man than we've really seen too much of before. Players will guide Mega Man through an arch and then into a trapdoor which takes them to the real stage. This entire portion serves no real purpose other than establishing Clown Man's stage will have tricks and traps, but in reality, this could have been handled with a little more action to it. Was there a true purpose to having this first screen where players will guide Mega Man through and under an arch while balloons race through the foreground? Did we need to have this trapdoor? It reminds me a little bit of Gyro Man's stage from Mega Man 5, where Mega Man will travel from a screen devoid of any obstacles onto an elevator, also devoid of any obstacles. In Gyro Man's stage, this helps give the idea of players are high up in the air, but it's also time-consuming without much real payoff. In Mega Man 8, it's a little more atmospheric, and visually, it's pretty fun. But similarly, the only real payoff you're getting as a player, so to speak, is learning that there's a trapdoor, which isn't all that important to the stage's gameplay. I'd argue it doesn't really teach players about the later trapdoor sequences, as those are very much their own thing with good and bad trapdoors players are required to fall into. This sort of thing isn't bad, but it does slow down the game, which stands out compared to previous Mega Man games, which were typically tightly packed with challenges that immediately move on from one challenge to the next, without really pausing for players to take their time. It does speak a little more to the general pace of Mega Man 8, which has a bit more of an exploratory feel to it than previous Mega Man games. I've heard of a debate between the idea of having an open room where all players do is run across it, and if there's any value in that. Technically speaking, as a player, all you're doing is holding the movement button. So one camp argues that this is bad, because it's a room where nothing is happening and players aren't doing anything. The other camp argues that this sort of room is okay if it adds atmosphere, or if it serves as a break for players. I happen to fall in the latter camp in terms of those types of rooms. When I play a game, I like for it to feel like an experience. So if I'm running through an area and all it's serving to do is absorb me into its world, that's enough for me to feel satisfied. So that's a very long-winded way to say that I happen to be okay with this introductory sequence to Clown Man's stage. You've entered his, fun world, and then you fall into this trap. Cool by me, but I do think it was worth pointing out how much that deviates from standard Mega Man, and why some people might not like that deviation. Our first real area is an area with a bunch of toys, which is fairly simple outside of a bolt players will need a later rush ability to obtain. The only truly notable thing here is that most of the toys are based on previous Mega Man enemies. You'll find an Iceman doll, a Cutman doll, one of the dinosaurs from Slash Man's stage of Mega Man 7, and Gutsman G from Mega Man 7. There's also this woodpecker thing, but I'm not sure if I remember that particular enemy. After that, we get to one of the two main level design ideas to Clown Man's stage. This particular one has trains that will travel across the screen, with Mega Man getting hurt if he touches the wrong spot, but also being able to ride on top of a portion of the train. Following this is the second main conceit to the stage, these trapdoors with X's, O's, skulls, or arrows on them. The train concept isn't too interesting, at least in the way it was handled. It's introduced well enough in that players will fall through train tracks that have no ground underneath, but can ride on a train that's on those very same train tracks. So, the introduction sequence has a portion underneath train tracks players can fall to, which also happens to have an enemy on it, clearly indicating players can go here, and visually telling that tale of this platforming idea. The idea is then built up with a much longer train track sequence, but now with another train track underneath with a separate train. So now we have the idea of 2 levels players can be on with 2 different trains. So far, so good. Finally, we get a track where a train comes in the opposite direction, colliding with one of the trains, with both being destroyed. Underneath, there's a portion of the lower train track that goes over a death pit, meaning players will have to either jump across or ride a train across. So that's all great. The mechanic is safely introduced, it's built up with more complexity added to it, and now we're ready for a cool challenge. Something like riding a train on the upper level, jumping off as it's destroyed to a train on the lower level, all over a death pit, potentially with enemies players will have to deal with while riding the trains. But that was it. Nothing more ever happens from the train sequence other than those first few sequences. It feels like it was an obstacle sequence building to something that then never does, which is a shame, because this idea feels like it was ripe with potential for interesting and unique challenges. The next concept of the trapdoors is the one the level will really play with. While it's mostly utilized during the second half of the stage, it's introduced here after the train sequence. Once again, players get a great introduction to the concept. Almost the entire time players are running across, they'll be able to see a background portion to the stage where a robot will come out of a door on the set timer, ring a bell, then enter back into its little castle. As the bell rings, the O's and X's will flash, and if a player stands on one of those blocks, it will create an interaction. While players could time out the bell hits as it's always a set timer, the robot hitting the bell in the background is an especially nice touch, not just because it's a fun visual showing why the action on stage is happening, but it also helps for players who are hard of hearing, or playing the game on mute for whatever reason, as there's also a visual indicator this will happen. The concept is simple enough. Stand on an O when the bell is struck and nothing happens. Stand on an X and Mega Man will be injured by an enemy. As this becomes more complex, stand on a skull and Mega Man will fall through the trapdoor. Stand on an arrow and Mega Man will be sent back to the start. Finally, stand on a question mark and players will shoot up outside of a different corresponding question mark trapdoor. The concept is interesting enough, and the real danger you'll be facing here are various enemy mobs that might prevent players from getting onto the correct block in time. That said, it's really not all that difficult, and it presents a tone pretty early on that Mega Man 8 is a little easier, to my opinion, than many of the previous games in the franchise, for better or worse. While I do find it to be on the easy side, there is a nice progression to its complexity, so I do think it's overall handled well. The final portion of the stage I didn't mention are these dropping skull ramp elevators. However, they are entirely relegated to being a side section for an optional bolt, and this isn't possible to tackle until players come back with another ability like the Tornado Hold. While some players might not like replaying stages to get everything, I don't personally mind, and I think this is well done in that it becomes very clear for players who are trying to 100% the stage that they won't be able to use the skull elevators. Soon after, the stage will progress in a way that forces players to see the bolt they've missed, really nicely introducing the concept that players will want to come back here with more abilities. Overall, Clown Man Stage comes across as not too challenging with some interesting gimmicks, both of which I personally would have liked to have seen with slightly higher stakes attached to them, in particular the rideable train concept. One more minor thing that I do want to bring up is this elevator in the second half of the stage. After players finish one of the trapdoor sequences and prior to the general elevator section, there's an elevator that takes Mega Man up to the elevator sequence. From a gameplay standpoint, it's completely pointless and wastes the player's time. So why is this here? I can only imagine that it's either a secret loading screen or it's a world building thing, because otherwise there's no real reason for this. If the stage was interconnected and you needed to somehow be brought up, then I get it, but it's not. It's not something that necessarily bothers me, but when I look at it in the totality of the stage, it does stick out as being a little random. One more aspect of Clown Man Stage I failed to mention is a sub-boss. Mega Man 8 includes 4 sub-bosses in the main stages, with Clown Man Stage including the Sisi Roll. The Sisi Roll is a pretty simple boss in that it will bounce around at an angle and occasionally pop out enemies players will need to also shoot at. Because of its angled bouncing, the Mega Ball becomes the perfect weapon to use against the boss, which will help make quick work of him. While I tend to go back and forth about how I feel about these sub-bosses in general, as I mentioned way back during my Mega Man 4 video, I do think the Sisi Roll is well designed and interesting enough. It's nice that the weapon that works particularly well against it happens to be the Mega Ball, as that's the one boss ability players will definitely have by this point. What's perhaps the most interesting about this sub-boss is that the Sisi Roll, and sub-bosses in general, will drop a rush ability after defeating them, and are the new way to obtain rush abilities. So let's talk about rush abilities in Mega Man 8. This is another one of those major shakeups from the established formula. During the NES era, and ever since Mega Man 2, the primary way Mega Man would receive his unique helper abilities was for defeating a boss. For example, in Mega Man 2, defeat Heatman and you'll receive item number 1, defeat Airman and you'll receive item number 2, defeat Flashman and you'll receive item number 3. This formula was mostly cemented at that point. Mega Man 4 included special helper abilities Mega Man could find in stages, but you'd still receive rush abilities for defeating a certain boss. Mega Man 6 then forego the rush abilities for the rush adapters, which were also obtained by defeating a certain boss. Mega Man 7 finally shook this up by making it so players would find various rush abilities in stages, or be able to purchase them in Auto Shop if they were missed. Mega Man 8 then somewhat reverts back to the idea of the NES games. Once again, the rush abilities are found by defeating certain bosses, but this time it's a reward for defeating the various sub-bosses of the game. On top of that, all of the rush abilities of Mega Man 8 are completely unique from what we'd seen before. For defeating the Sisi Roll in Clown Man stage, Mega Man will obtain a rush question. For defeating the Ururuun in Grenade Man stage, Mega Man will obtain a rush bike. For defeating the Gearna Eye in Sword Man stage, Mega Man will obtain a rush bomber. Finally, for defeating Gorone in Aqua Man stage, Mega Man will obtain a rush charger. The NES Mega Man games had various issues with rush due to the fact that rush would always be a movement-based tool. Because new players wouldn't know which boss unlocked more rush abilities, and given the non-linear design of Mega Man, there's no fair way for the team to create rush movement-based challenges in the base stages unless rush is provided players right off the bat. But then, abilities like Rush Jet typically are able to completely trivialize various intended challenges. Rush also faced the issue, to my opinion, where the challenges utilizing Rush were never particularly fun. Rush Coil simply bounced players higher, and really, challenges around that were never particularly interesting. Rush Jet sometimes allowed for more interesting challenges, like in Mega Man 3, but usually just resulted in a sequence where Mega Man would have to cross a gap, so you just pull out the tool and that's it. While Mega Man 8's way to unlock Rush isn't all that different to the NES Mega Man games, the fact that they're unlocked through sub-bosses, and that they've completely changed in how they handle, makes them much more interesting, and actually fixes a lot of the issues that Rush presented to the Mega Man series. Before I go over each ability, let's go over the fact that you unlock the abilities through sub-bosses instead of normal bosses. The Rush abilities of Mega Man 8 act like support abilities. So, because you unlock them by defeating a sub-boss midway through a stage, it means players can obtain a support ability before ever reaching the boss. Meaning, even if a player can't complete the stage entirely, they've still obtained that Rush reward, and it'll be something that could just help struggling players make it all the way through. Or, simply by obtaining the ability at the midway point of a stage, it's a tool that players can use that much sooner, which again makes it more interesting, as players can use the abilities in the stages they receive them. Perhaps because the boss abilities end up being used far more as abilities to aid in traversal, Rush was completely redesigned from movement-based to support-based, and as I mentioned, the design feels far more useful. Rush Question has Rush teleport in and then randomly throw a useful item to Mega Man, or do nothing. It's a gamble, but there's no downside to using it, and it's something where players could just obtain something incredibly helpful in a pinch. It's sort of like having a portable Eddy from the NES Mega Man games, but one that you can't exploit as you only get one use of it per live. It's also sort of like a nerfed Rush Search from Mega Man 7. For some players who like to try and dig everything with Rush Search for secrets, that might be pretty annoying. But on the other hand, the fact that this is one use does prevent players from wasting time and potentially boring themselves. Rush Bike is a motorcycle that Mega Man can ride around while shooting projectiles, and will give Mega Man the ability to make long jumps. It's one that I honestly only ever found myself using for long jumps, making it a more interesting Rush Jet for me, but it does prevent Mega Man from taking damage while he's riding it, and it does serve as a fun alternative way to traverse and platform. Rush Bomber will see Rush flying across the screen dropping bombs on enemies. So really, an additional attack players can summon that's probably fairly helpful, although I honestly never found myself using it. Rush Charger is similar to Rush Bomber in that Rush will fly back and forth across the screen, but instead of dropping bombs, he'll drop weapon and life recharges for Mega Man, acting as Mega Man 8's version of an E-Tank. While some players might not like the nerf E-Tank, which I'll touch on in just a moment, all of these make Rush generally feel more useful than in previous games. Rush can now attack enemies, act as a speedy shield, heal the player, and potentially provide a random item. Even if I forget to use Rush in Mega Man 8, which is honestly often the case, I'm still more likely to appreciate these support tools than the somewhat clunky traversal challenges from the NES Mega Man titles. The only real thing I think players are missing with this is Rush Jet, as I'm sure there's a number of players who either needed Rush Jet for the help in completing certain challenges, or enjoyed trying to find ways to break the game with Rush Jet. It's not that I'm against movement tool-based challenges, by the way. I just think most of the time, the Mega Man games don't end up coming up with interesting ideas around them. For example, I really love the wire tool of Mega Man 4 and the super arrow of Mega Man 5, but the game is never really designed around using them in interesting ways. Similarly, I think the Rush Jet adapter from Mega Man 6 is a super fun tool, but it was never really explored. So overall, I think this was a nice change-up, and it's a shame this sort of concept was never explored further in future Mega Man titles. Perhaps the most controversial change-up, I'd wager, would be the fact that for the first time since Mega Man 1, Mega Man 8 no longer includes E-Tanks. Instead, Rush Charger, which isn't even found until the second half of the game, serves as Mega Man 8's version of an E-Tank. As I described earlier, Rush Charger will fly back and forth across the screen, dropping both health and weapon recharges. While it does also drop weapon recharges, which can be useful, because of the way it works, it's less immediately helpful than an E-Tank, and it's definitely less helpful than the combination of E-Tank, W-Tank, and S/M-Tank from the games that included those. While an E-Tank instantly restored health without putting players in any further danger, as this would happen during the pause menu, Rush Charger takes time to fly across the screen and drop its health during the action, meaning players are still open to being hit by enemies while it's in use. Not only that, but its drops are random. If players are in desperate need of health, they may randomly get SOL, as Rush Charger might not drop health in the moment they need it, and might even drop the health somewhere that's currently out of reach, like directly under an enemy. So to that end, it's an interesting change, and probably the real change-up that can make Mega Man 8 more challenging for some players. Ever since Mega Man 2 and the introduction to E-Tanks, if players were truly stuck, they could usually brute force their way past a combat challenge with E-Tanks, especially considering that players could stock up to 4 E-Tanks or even 9 E-Tanks depending on the game, whereas Rush Charger is only a one-time use per live. Although, E-Tanks were also disposable and a limited resource. If players used these up, they'd have to go back to prior stages to farm them, or, in the case of Mega Man 7 and some of the Game Boy Mega Man games, save up bolts to buy more. Rush Charger, on the other hand, while only being available once per life, does come back if players die, so it actually balances out pretty nicely in that way, as yes, players might not be able to brute force their way through a boss with 4 full health recharges, like in prior Mega Man games, but they also don't have to worry about wasting a health recharge when attempting a difficult boss. So let's consider all of the implications. If players are having trouble with a boss, full health recharges in Mega Man are a way to make it so players never need to truly learn a boss or its pattern. It's a way to brute force past the boss. This can be a lifesaver for players who are truly struggling, or players who don't feel the need or want to learn a certain boss pattern, but it does also provide an easy way out where players might not get that satisfaction of conquering a boss fight. At the same time, if players are struggling with boss fights, it can be incredibly tedious or annoying if they feel like they have to farm for a limited resource in order to properly attempt the boss fight again, as struggling players might feel like they need an E-Tank to even attempt the boss. Then, with the live system of Mega Man, if players run out of E-Tanks and still die to a boss, they might feel like their next attempts to the boss are pointless and a waste of time, as they no longer have the resource they were using to help carry them through the boss fight, similar to how a player might be annoyed if they attempt a boss with its weakness, die, and then no longer have enough weapon energy to use the weakness against the boss for their next attempt. So, with all of that in mind, I actually really like this change up to how E-Tanks work in Mega Man 8. The fact that you only have one use feels, to me, like a great way to give players who need extra help that little boost, but then not overdo it by giving players a ridiculous overabundance of this health recharge, like in games like Mega Man 3 where players have 9 health recharges. I also like that this tool recharges when players die, rather than during a game over, as it takes away that annoyance of needing to farm for more, or more specifically, that players might feel hopeless attempting the boss after losing and wasting their health recharge. There's an argument to be had that it might be better if Rush Charger only recharged after a game over and during a continue. That way, it makes the fights a little more tense after using Rush Charger, as players would know that this is their one shot. But I feel like if someone is using Rush Charger, they're probably already struggling anyways, and I'm not a fan of players feeling like they're wasting time afterwards by repeatedly dying if they weren't on their last life, just so they can return to the same spot with the same tool. That then leaves the way the ability functions compared to an E-Tank, with players needing to gather the health over time as opposed to being immediately given the health. This is a change I go a little more back and forth on. It certainly adds more tension to a fight where players feel they need more health, and I imagine this might have been done, in part, to make this look like a rush ability, but also in part because the team decided to give players infinite health recharges, so they wanted to balance that out by making the tool not quite as useful. In the end, I think I prefer the instant health refill of previous games, but mainly because I don't like the randomness of how Rush Charger functions. When I think about regaining health with added tension in a fight, I automatically go to Hollow Knight. In essence, Hollow Knight gives players infinite health recharges, but the trade-off is that it takes time to recharge health. Players have to charge up to restore their health, and on top of that, each health recharge only gives players back one piece of health. It helps add a lot of tension to the Hollow Knight fights, but also provides ample amounts of strategy. To me, that's a perfect trade-off, but the randomness of Rush Charger doesn't provide any sort of real strategy. It feels more like a desperate plea for Rush to drop health sooner than later and near Mega Man rather than underneath an opponent. Yes, it can randomly create some interesting gameplay as players will be motivated to collect health, but also avoid whatever enemy they're fighting at the same time. But I think in the case of Mega Man, in this regard, I probably prefer how an E-Tank functions. So, in some ways, I really like the change up to Rush Charger, but it's still not a perfect solution for me. Although, how do you feel about Rush Charger versus E-Tanks? Now that we've talked quite a bit about some of the new mechanics to Mega Man 8, I'd like to move on to our first boss, Clown Man. Clown Man has no specific pattern I'm aware of, but rather a few readable attacks he'll alternate between. These include either swinging around a high bar utilizing his Thunderclaw, creating an attack players will need to jump over. He'll also be open to attacks during this, creating a nice opportunity for players to be both offensive and defensive. His Thunder Carnival attack involves him turning into a ball and bouncing around, where players will likely want to slide to get out of the way. Unlike his Trapeze attack, Clown Man will be invincible during this attack. His Thunderclaw sees Clown Man reach up to the sky, telegraphing to players he's about to dig his hands into the ground, which will then pop up at the player's position. The telegraph is long enough that players should have ample time to read it and jump out of harm's way. Finally, he'll also sometimes rush across the screen. Once you get used to this pattern, I don't find any of it particularly challenging. In fact, I actually completed this boss pea shooter pellet only without charging the Mega Buster to understand his boss pattern better, and had no trouble at all. But that's not a bad thing. All the attacks are nicely readable and completely unique. I think it should be a decent challenge for new players, and I like that each one presents a different type of skill check. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of the visual design for this boss, maybe out of bias because it's a clown, and not even a creepy one at that, which I tend to find interesting in a fun, creepy sort of way, from a gameplay standpoint, I do think this is a well-designed boss fight. For defeating Clown Man, players will receive the Thunder Claw, but as per usual in these videos, I'll break down my thoughts on all the boss abilities once we've obtained all of them. So let's move on to our next stage, and the boss most weak to Thunder Claw, Grenade Man. True to his name, Grenade Man's stage is all about explosives. There are barrels and boxes the player can explode, both of which are presented as ways to create unique platforming challenges. Timed bomb platforms players will jump on that explode after reaching 0, just like we've seen multiple times in previous games, and a set of boxes that will explode in sequence after their fuse is lit by fire. All of these mechanics are introduced, then built upon in clever ways. Like Clown Man's stage, several of these mechanics never get complex enough to be truly difficult, but they still stand out and make this level unique amongst a growing sea of Mega Man stages. The first of these mechanics, which are barrels that explode after being shot at, is introduced safely before they're surrounded by enemies and cover up insta-death pits. It's really the perfect way to handle this type of obstacle, as you're presenting players with enemies you want to shoot at, all while missing will cause the player a more difficult route via platforming. It creates a nice little balance of, is shooting the best choice here, or is attempting to avoid enemies without firing a bullet the best? Of all of the obstacles in the stage, this is the one I really wish had been elaborated on a little more, because it presents so many interesting opportunities. In one incredibly brief instance, insta-kill spikes are also introduced to the ceiling, making exploding some of these ideal as players won't accidentally jump into their death. More of this would have been fantastic, and I would have liked to have seen sections that merge the idea of danger below with danger above, so players will have to puzzle out the optimal route. However, the sequence instead culminates with a giant puzzle section, with the puzzle really just being about how to get to a bolt. This giant puzzle box sequence is slow and exploratory, which really, once again, hammers down that Mega Man 8 has a much slower pace than its predecessors, and really seems to ask of its players to stop, think, and look around rather than blast forwards. After the puzzle sequence, players come to the exploding timer platforms, this time mixed with the up and downs of Mega Man 4, now called Ururuun. This one is a pretty standard fare Mega Man challenge, although I feel like the difficulty has been tweaked down a bit, perhaps due to the slower feel of the game, or perhaps due to the fact that, unlike the up and downs, as I discussed earlier, Mega Man can actually survive being hit by the Ururuun. It tones down the tension quite a bit, which is really a matter of preference here. I think I prefer the higher level of anxiety and tension of the up and downs, as that combined with the exploding bombs would create a perfect challenge, where players will want to quickly hop off of an exploding bomb, but need to wait for the Ururuun, and while that's still the case here, a mistake isn't all that costly, as players can still guide Mega Man to safety, so it really destroys most of the tension. The final concept here is probably the best executed, with this one being boxes that explode after a fuse is lit, either by a walking torch robot or by players with Swordman's ability. It's introduced in a safe spot where players will learn the mechanic on solid ground before players are forced to deal with this sequence of exploding blocks while standing on those very blocks. It forces players to race to the end, and the team cleverly put a bolt at the end of one of the sequences to both entice players to potential danger and reward players for their speed and efficiency. Another section I want to call out is this area with swinging hammers. The team seemed to try and incorporate some 3D elements into Mega Man 8 in order to create unique obstacles, and the 3D certainly helps to create a sense of depth with these that would be much more difficult to achieve with purely 2D sprites. And while that's interesting on its own, the section that introduces these immediately after the sub-boss is probably one of the most stark Mega Man 8 contrasts to previous games I can think of in terms of its difficulty. The first of these is introduced over a platform where Mega Man will be safe if hit, but then there's a short sequence over a pit. This would seem like classic Mega Man, where the stakes are quickly ramped up to 100, where a mistake will cost players alive. However, make a mistake here, and it turns out there's actually a safety platform underneath. While there are some enemies, the difference between a full life and one hit is pretty drastic in terms of difficulty, and shows to me a level of difficulty restraint that wasn't seen in many of the prior Mega Man games. Now, there is a section later on where these hammers are mixed with insta-death pits, but I think this level of forgiveness would have been much more rare in prior games. When I really think back on Grenade Man Stage, I think this is probably one of the most standard Mega Man stages in Mega Man 8 in terms of the types of challenges it presents, but also one of the least memorable ones to me, maybe for that reason. I don't think anything about the stage is particularly bad, but I also don't personally love the stage. Although, to be fair, that level of blandness could also be reflective of how I subjectively feel about the music for the stage and environmental aesthetic of Grenade Man Stage. Like Clown Man Stage before, Grenade Man Stage is another one of the 4 stages with a sub-boss, this time being the Ururuun. The Ururuun is a fairly simple boss whose main conceit is a spinning junk shield that will rotate around it, with players being able to pluck away at the junk in order to create an opening. That said, the Ururuun is weak to a charged Mega Buster shot, which can oftentimes hurt it even if the junk shield is present. Smartly, like the Sisi Roll before it, the Mega Ball is a great option for the Ururuun, meaning that players will already come equipped with the right tool for the job. Beyond its shield, the boss will swoop across the screen towards Mega Man, send out junk above the player, which can be easily avoided, or dig into the ground while leaving a bouncing piece of junk. While nothing about this sub-boss is particularly challenging, it should serve as a nice skill check for newer players. Even if you haven't figured out the Mega Buster shot or to use boss weapons yet, this could be somewhat challenging, but still not too difficult. Before moving on to Grenade Man, there's an important element to this stage I have yet to mention, which was also apparent in Clown Man stage. It's something that was more so a feature of Mega Man X and finally brought to the mainline Mega Man series, and that's screens which combine both horizontal and vertical screen scrolling. Up until this point, every NES Mega Man game only had horizontal screen scrolling, with vertical traversal being separated by new scenes. When Mega Man X was introduced, probably in part due to X's wall slide and wall jump, the scenes were opened up to massive levels without individual scenes that would load in, and a combination of vertical and horizontal scrolling. But when Mega Man 7 was eventually made, one of the distinctions that seemed to set the game apart and give it that classic Mega Man feel was that, for the most part, stages were limited to horizontal screen scrolling, or areas where the screen only scrolled vertically. There was only one section of one stage, that being Spring Man stage, which combined the two. Now, in Mega Man 8, you'll notice that while stages are still separated by scenes, the scenes are oftentimes longer than in the prior games, really starting to merge a bit more into that Mega Man X feel. Not only that, but many stages have sections with this combined screen scrolling. It's one of those things where there isn't a correct answer to what's best, but each choice comes with its pros and cons, and it's worth touching on those a little bit. To start with some pros of combining the scrolling, this is Mega Man 8. That means we are now 62 boss stages into classic Mega Man, with even more stages if you count the Wily stages, and then even more if you want to count the Mega Man Game Boy games. So at some point, I'm sure it becomes incredibly difficult to come up with new and unique challenges. But by opening up the game to a new vertical dimension and how some of the challenges scroll, well, that of course opens up more variety for more types of challenges. There is a downside though. The downside that's probably the most notable to an area which combines horizontal and vertical scrolling is properly communicating to players what's below and out of sight. It's a problem that the classic Mega Man series didn't have to worry about before, because if there was something below the player, that was an insta-death pit. But it's something that Mega Man X did sometimes struggle with, as many of the stages had so much verticality. The solution for Mega Man X was to have walls that players could slide down or jump off of in order to soften the speed of a fall. However, those walls weren't always present. One potential solution is to zoom out the camera more, which would give players more time to react to what's below them. While that's a solution that Mega Man 11 decides to go with, Mega Man 8 preferred a more zoomed-in camera with larger sprites. Another solution would be to make sure that if a section has both vertical and horizontal scrolling, there's nothing that can instantly kill the player if they accidentally drop, which seems to primarily be the case here. There are also other ways to try to communicate with players what's safe and what isn't safe. Take Grenade Man stage. There's this section I mentioned earlier where swinging hammers can cause a player to fall to what would seem to be an insta-death, but instead turns out to be a safe platform. This is actually cleverly communicated to observant players beforehand, as players will first climb a ladder near this section and be able to visually see that there's a platform below, if they're paying attention. Then, when an insta-death pit is introduced shortly afterwards, the pit is large and enemies shoot out from below, pretty well indicating players won't want to drop. Generally speaking, it seems like this is something that was really on the team's mind when they introduced these sections, how to make sure dropping felt fair. In Search Man stage, these sections are accompanied by grapple hook latches, making it so players can slowly drop down and observe while they're using their Thunderclaw. Aqua Man stage uses Mega Man's new swimming mechanic during these areas, meaning players will lower down slowly if they're swimming. Astro Man stage has drops that are entirely safe, as does Clown Man stage. As a whole though, by making these sections safer and more fair, it does also accumulate to the game feeling a little easier than previous entries into the series, for better or worse depending on your tastes. As, you know, these are now sections without insta-death challenges, which is something that was incredibly prevalent in the past. There's yet another important change up to Mega Man 8 that accounts in part for why it can feel easier. The previous classic Mega Man games all had 2 checkpoints per stage. one at roughly halfway through the stage, and a second checkpoint at the boss gate. If players died, they returned to their most recent checkpoint, and if they got a game over, they'd have to play the stage all over again. A pretty big punishment, but also something fairly common for the time. Mega Man 8 changes this up by having a total of 4 checkpoints throughout the stage, and breaking the stage up into quarters. So, a quarter of the way through, players will get a checkpoint, halfway through another checkpoint, at around 3/4 the third checkpoint, and finally a checkpoint at the boss gate. On top of that, if a stage has a sub-boss, that adds an additional 5th checkpoint right before the sub-boss, so Grenade Man stage actually has 5 checkpoints. But that's not all. The checkpoint roughly halfway through the stage is actually a continue point, so if players get a game over after reaching this, they'll instead return here if choosing to continue rather than at the start of the stage. If I had to guess, this is probably tied to another change for Mega Man 8, and that's that the levels are now the longest they've ever been. Or at least I think they are. I honestly haven't calculated this out, but I will say that the current world record any percent speedrun of Mega Man 8 sits at just under 51 minutes, while the current any percent speedrun record of Mega Man 7 sits at 40.5 minutes. Not that that's like scientific evidence given all of the tricks speedrunners use. Anyways, gone are the short and sweet levels of the NES era, so you could argue that without a halfway continue point, the punishment for dying at the end of a stage in Mega Man 8 is far greater than dying at the end of the stage in any of the prior Mega Man games, because it would take that much longer to get back to where you were. And I'd agree with that. While I'm of the opinion that there's nothing inherently wrong with the lives-based punishment system in games, and like any other choice, it depends on the game and how it's balanced, I do think lives-based games can easily run the risk of being too punishing, and ever since Mega Man 3, there's been a slow creep upwards in the length of Mega Man stages, meaning that punishment for a game over had also been creeping upwards. So, to my opinion, this choice feels like the correct choice for Mega Man 8, and definitely helps keep the game feeling fair. After explosives galore, players will reach Grenade Man. True to his name, half of Grenade Man's attacks are explosive projectiles. He'll either leap across the screen throwing down projectile bombs, or, while on one side of the screen, either on the ground or clinging to the wall, toss a flash bomb at Mega Man, which will explode into a small AoE after detonating. These are both easy enough to deal with after players understand the attacks, with the leaping grenades requiring players to run in the direction of his jump, and the flash bomb either being a matter of avoiding it if Grenade Man tosses it from the wall, or jumping over it if Grenade Man launches it from the ground. While these two attacks are about reading and reacting to projectiles, Grenade Man does have a couple more attacks to add some more variety and ensure the fight isn't too simple. One is dashing across the screen, making for a quicker reaction attack where players will need to leap over his dash. The other sees him slamming down junk from the ceiling players will need to avoid, typically needing to utilize their slide. While it's visually distinct from a grenade or bomb he's tossing at players, it's still about reading and avoiding a projectile, this time simply being one dropping vertically. Because Grenade Man's two leaping attacks are pretty similar visually, in the sense that if a player sees Grenade Man jumping, there's an immediate response of time to react, I think it makes him much more challenging than Clown Man before, as there's a higher likelihood players will respond incorrectly on a whim, and, at least in my case, potentially trap themselves into the wrong spot for a flash bomb. Another thing that ups the challenge for Grenade Man is that, similar to many of the bosses in Mega Man 8, there's a second phase that happens when Grenade Man is reduced to around 1/5 of his health. Here, he'll explode the ground below, and the arena will change to uneven terrain. Because many of his projectile attacks are easily dodged with the slide, this quickly ups the challenge, even if it's brief. If players are struggling, he's weak to Clown Man's Thunderclaw attack. Although, while some weaknesses in Mega Man 8 cause specific exaggerated animations when the boss is hit, Grenade Man is lacking in this, which in some ways actually makes him easier, as players can quickly spam Thunderclaw attacks against him. Like Clown Man before, Grenade Man is a boss who offers plenty of variety in his boss fight. He can be challenging on the first attempt as players are learning his pattern, but can be easily dealt with after players understand how each attack works. To that end, it's a fight that isn't too difficult to master, but feels like the right difficulty for a lives-based game like Mega Man, where game over can cause so much backtracking, and I think he's another well-designed boss that definitely feels unique compared to the other bosses of Mega Man 8. For defeating Grenade Man, players will obtain his Flash Bomb. So, Flash Bomb in hand, it's time to head over to Frost Man. Frost Man's stage is perhaps the most infamous of Mega Man 8 thanks to snowboard sections. But before I discuss that, let's talk about the structure and more traditional platform elements of the stage. The stage is broken up into a repeat of 3 main sections. First is a horizontal corridor, then a vertical climb, and finally a snowboard sequence back down. The first full sequence of the 2 is introductory in about every way. We're introduced to enemies, but not true challenges during the horizontal sequence. The elevator is an incredibly basic climb up with only simple bat robots to duke it out against, and the snowboard sequence is slow and fairly manageable. Outside of the snowboard sequence, there's no other hidden bolts to be found here during the first 2 screens, and it really feels, overall, like all of this is set up for the rest of the stage. The slow start makes sense, but as I mentioned in my Mega Man 7 video, I do think elevator sequences can feel boring to my personal taste if they're too simple. Both elevator sequences in this stage are a little too simple for me. Easy to kill bats will come down, and in a way, it almost feels like padding. I think Mega Man 7 did a better job of this concept in Shade Man stage, which has enemies coming out of various windows, and edges to the elevator, which helps keep players on their toes. On the platforming end, the second half of the stage becomes far more interesting than the first, as this feels like the portion where the developers tried to be creative rather than simple enemy challenges. The first sequence involves robots dropping ice chunks, which sometimes have enemies frozen inside, and ice pusher machines that launches them forwards. If the ice hits a wall, it smashes open, and if it contains an enemy, that enemy is now ready to fight. As Mega Man can safely jump on the ice blocks, it opens this up for a number of interesting challenges for optional bolts, where players will need to either properly time out jumping onto one of the flying ice blocks, or utilize an ice pusher while also timing out standing on one of the ice blocks. While I do like these challenges to obtain the bolts, it's also something I'm a little conflicted about. These are the most interesting platform challenges in Frostman's stage. There's no other point in this stage where players will be asked to jump onto a moving ice chunk. So it brings the question of, why are the challenges relegated to being optional? I can see 2 potential answers here, but I'd love to know your thoughts as well. Is it because these require a little bit of logic and problem solving, and are therefore different types of challenges than the normal run and gun gameplay of Mega Man? Perhaps it was deemed that this sort of challenge deviated too much and was therefore more fitting as an optional challenge. Thus, you get a clear delineation where players can beat a stage by running and gunning without dealing with too much in terms of puzzles, or even stopping and waiting to retry a challenge, and anything that's slightly exploratory would be relegated to bolts. Or was it because this was deemed too difficult overall to be a standard level challenge within the difficulty of Mega Man 8? I'm leaning towards the first of these, by the way, but this concept is a shame because I can see a lot of interesting challenges and ideas springing from it. Perhaps players have to ride a chunk of ice over a bed of spikes and jump off just in time. Perhaps it's a sequence of timing out jumping onto and riding one chunk of ice, then timing out jumping onto a second one. So sort of like that first bolt challenge I described. Meanwhile, I think the second bolt challenge of these that requires a little more thought does feel a little more exploratory and like it probably belongs as an optional bolt. But as it stands, outside of going for optional bolts, it's pretty easy to almost entirely avoid interacting with any of this challenge or concept, which I feel like defeats the purpose of it a little bit. Even if it's something short, like the one screen-dropping icicle challenge of Freeze Man stage, at least that challenge made players actually interact with it in an interesting way, even if it was brief. Afterwards is a short vertical climb, which, like the section before, is really one made interesting by the secret bolts it contains. One by destroying a cracked ice container for a bolt with Mega Man's abilities, and the other for obtaining a bolt by destroying the ice ground beneath Mega Man. Before one final snowboard sequence, there is an interesting platform challenge with robots creating smoke in the foreground, blocking players' view of the platforms ahead. It's a great idea, but once again, is hindered by not being elaborated on, and an incredibly short sequence, either with additional enemies or what I think would be the best way to complement this sequence. As it stands, players can safely stand on a platform until they're sure they can see the path ahead, but this is the sort of challenge that really begs for there to be some sort of timer. Perhaps the platforms drop after a period of time, meaning players have to push forwards even if they're only somewhat sure that there's a platform ahead. As players have a chance to glimpse a future platform before smoke covers it up, it would create an interesting challenge of needing to note and memorize the path ahead as players are platforming. Looking back at this stage, in some ways, this is probably the most disappointing I've looked at. It had a couple great concepts for its platforming, but neither were explored. Really, the most interesting ideas for this stage were reserved for its optional bolts. And as someone who can be a bit of a completionist, I do enjoy going for these bolts, but when I strip away the bolts, the stage feels pretty bare bones. It could be due to its other major conceit, and maybe that's because the developers wanted to tone down the difficulty so it could all be focused on the snowboarding sequences, or jet board. I've always referred to this as the snowboard sequence, and typically that's how I've seen other people refer to it, so I'm going to stick to that terminology even though, yes, I'm aware it's actually a jet board. So something new to Mega Man 8 are a couple of gimmick sequences that take players away from traditional platforming and attempt to add a bit of variety to the game. Whether this is successful for you as a player will depend on your preferences and what you like. And the most notorious of these is this snowboard sequence, because it seems most people don't like these sequences or find them too challenging. While I'm about to critique these, I do want to mention my overall feelings on this type of gameplay shift. Some games pull this off better than others, but for the most part, I think the gameplay of side content like this should really be complementing the gameplay of the main game or feel in line with it. You could argue that the snowboard sequence is in line with Mega Man's gameplay as it's quick reflex and reactionary, and in Mega Man, every single fight could be attributed to quick reflexes, but I'd also argue that there's an element of pattern recognition, whereas the snowboard sequence is pure reaction. While yes, you're jumping and sliding, this one feels like it deviates a little too much for my taste. To play devil's advocate here, there are notable exceptions for me. Like, I don't mind if a game with a massive world has side content with completely different gameplay. I'm thinking of something like a JRPG such as Final Fantasy VII. In a massive game with a long length, I think these can serve as nice little breaks from the story and main game, and even flesh out the world, as they're often used as games people within the world of the game are playing. So all of that is to say, I'm not someone who's entirely against minigames or gameplay shifts, but it does risk alienating your audience who like the core game, and I don't think the snowboarding one fits or is a particularly fun minigame. So I'm not someone who struggles too much with these sequences. I'm not saying that as a brag, but rather because my complaints have nothing to do with the difficulty, but I do think it's worth acknowledging that some players find these sections far too hard. There are a deviation of the gameplay mostly present in Mega Man 8, and that can immediately be incredibly annoying, because if you're losing due to something that isn't even supposed to be the main game, that's going to leave a bad taste in people's mouths. My issues with this sequence are repetition and how the optional bolts were handled. The way the snowboard minigame works is that Mega Man will fly forwards on this jet board and down a bunch of snow and ice. While there are occasional enemies, really it's about reacting to points where the player will have to jump to avoid a platform ending and falling to an instant death pit, or slide in time before something above kills them. As the screen starts to move pretty fast, the team included both visual and vocal warnings right before, both telling and visually showing the player which action they're about to need to perform. So, that's it. This repetitive minigame where you watch to see if you need to jump or slide, and react to said warning by pressing the button at the right time. To my opinion, this is repetitive and not all that interesting. On top of that, there are optional bolts in the first of these sequences, with it being complete luck if you happen to choose the right path to get the bolt. The first of these will require players to perform an optional jump, and if they do, luckily, a bolt will just happen to be sitting there. The second of these requires players to realize they should not jump off of a ledge and fall to the optional bolt. If you miss one, that means dying and restarting the sequence or coming back to it later after finishing out the stage. The second part reminds me a little bit of the minecart sequences in Donkey Kong Country and trying to find special bonus stages, which, to be perfectly honest, I really enjoy. Maybe that's because the levels in Donkey Kong Country are shorter and are designated minecart levels with checkpoints throughout. On top of that, there aren't bosses for players to worry about in these stages. It really is a focus on an adrenaline-filled minecart ride. This one's an interesting comparison to me because I very much enjoy the minecart sequences in Donkey Kong Country as a whole, and I think that's the common sentiment. And similar to Mega Man 8, you're on a fixed track with jumping or ducking being the only commands you can really perform. However, I'm not a big fan of the snowboard sequences in Mega Man 8, and I think that's the common sentiment. So I'm trying to wrap my head around why one is viewed as good, but the other one is viewed as bad. If I were to take a stab at it, I think it's because in Donkey Kong Country, players can still bounce off of enemies they jump on with a minecart, making it still feel like the platform game that Donkey Kong Country is. At the same time, while players do have to quickly react to what's in front of them, I think they typically get a little more time to visually react. Mega Man 8, on the other hand, while it does have Mega Man jump and slide, the main mechanic of shooting takes a back seat here, and while Mega Man does jump and slide, it's really reacting to a button prompt players are receiving thanks to this.
Jump, jump, slide, slide.
Rather than players having a chance to truly react to what they're visually seeing in-game in front of them. So, as a thought exercise, let's pretend Mega Man 8 has to include these snowboard sequences. But you're the designer behind the snowboard sequence. What do you do to fix it, and how do you try to make it more fun for players? And let's avoid the Sonic 3 route, which is another popular and well-known snowboard sequence. Sonic 3 includes a snowboard sequence at the start of Ice Cap Zone, which was also well-beloved, but there was no danger, and really, it was almost akin to a cool cutscene. If this challenge were given to me, and looking at what I know from other games, I think this is how I would tackle it. For one, slow down the snowboard and remove all of the prompts telling players how to react. I don't think it's fun to react to a prompt, and action should be at a reasonable speed that most players can actually react to what's happening on screen. For two, I think Mega Man's Mega Buster should probably be included a bit more. Sure, we could sprinkle in some enemies, which is already the case, but perhaps there are closed gates and players would need to jump and shoot a device that opens the gate in front of them. Now we're incorporating Mega Man's full main moveset into this sequence and giving players a longer opportunity to react to things on their own, not due to a button prompt. I think you could also play around with multiple platforms a little bit more, with optional platforms players can jump on, creating a bit more of a choose-your-own-adventure route through the snowboard sequence. That's probably a good starting point, but it would require testing and, this is just me thinking about this as I type it, honestly. It could have its own flaws, of course, but I think this at least alleviates some of the common complaints about the snowboard section if we're saying we have to include it. But to my original query, really, I would love to know what you think would have fixed the snowboard sequence if we're saying it's required in Mega Man 8. If you're able to make jump, jump, and slide, slide, you'll make it to Frost Man. Frost Man is the big heavy of Mega Man 8 with slow and dramatic movements. His attacks are dramatic enough that if you stay close to him, he isn't really all that difficult. He'll hop towards the player, perform a melee attack where he casts ice around his fist and punches at the player, or perform his Ice Wave attack that courses through the ground, which players will need to hop over in order to avoid getting frozen. If they are frozen, he'll bash Mega Man against the wall. Finally, he'll drop an ice block from above and bash it towards the player as a projectile. The first of these are all incredibly simple to avoid once you recognize the tell. If he pulls his arm back, jump up and you'll easily avoid his Ice Fist. If he puts his arm up, he's going to use his Ice Wave, so get ready to jump to avoid being frozen. As long as players stay close, his hop can be easily avoided by sliding underneath. Really, that leaves his Ice Projectile attack, which is the only one I wasn't sure how to predict. Granted, I only tested fighting him a few times. This attack is really cool, as he'll use one of the ice blocks players had seen throughout the stage and bash them to create a projectile. But like before, if players land on the ice block, it'll act just like a platform and not hurt them. The height he bashes the block at changes, with some requiring players to jump over and others players should slide under, and that height shift is one I wasn't able to lock down. But it is a super cool attack, and if you stay further back from him than I was, I'm sure it's easier to read how to react, even if it is random. Like Grenade Man, when Frost Man is low on health, for me around 1/6 of his health bar, he'll smash the ground dropping the ice blocks from above. It's not the most challenging attack, but it does add another level of variety to Frost Man, and I like that idea of this desperation attack from the Robot Master bosses. Like Clown Man and Grenade Man before, I think Frost Man has a nice variety of attacks and feels wholly unique. Even though half of his attacks are technically projectiles, as I like to stay close to him and he's so huge, they end up feeling kinda like melee attacks, and that helps him feel unique. This makes a third strong boss fight in a row, to my opinion. If players are struggling, the Flash Bomb is especially effective against Frost Man, with it not only dealing good damage, but also sometimes stunning Frost Man, and even canceling out the Frost Wave attack. For defeating Frost Man, players will obtain his Ice Wave attack. So it's onwards to the final of the 4 initial Mega Man 8 Robot Masters, Tengu Man. Like Frost Man, Tengu Man stage is splintered into 2 portions, one being traditional Mega Man platforming and the other being a shmup portion. So once again, I'll split this up into talking about the traditional portion before touching on the shmup. It is notable that while Frost Man stage had snowboard sequences bookending the first and second halves, Tengu Man stage utilizes its shmup portion as the halfway separator, with it bookending the first half and starting the second half. But enough of that, let's talk about the traditional Mega Man portion. Tengu Man stage has 2 main challenges. Primarily in these sequences, players will have to deal with an ever-present wind that pushes them forwards. It's a bit like Toadman stage from Mega Man 4, but there the rain only pushed players back, and here the wind only pushes players forwards. Also unique to this concept is that, while the rain of Toadman stage only pushed players back when they jumped, the wind of Tengu Man stage will push Mega Man forward at all times, regardless of if players are idling, running, or jumping. These challenges are actually some of my favorite of this series of 4 stages so far, with it feeling like the team really understood the assignment here. After the wind is introduced over a number of safe platforms, the main 2 additional challenges are presented. First, a platform on a propeller that will occasionally propel up before dropping again, and then lots and lots of enemies. The enemies feel like they're really just there for fun, as they're simple one-shot enemies. Maybe it was a case of the team finally being able to place an abundance of enemies without needing to worry about slowdown thanks to the power of the PlayStation and Saturn, so they dropped a massive amount of them to give players an abundance to shoot at, or perhaps it's a tease of the shmup to come. After all, the birds who fly at the player do fly in a typical shmup sine wave pattern. But what I really like are the challenges of the wind mixed with these propeller platforms. It mixes needing to plan out the new forward jump momentum from the wind with timing-based challenges as the propellers pop up. Thanks to the fact that the platforms never drop back completely off-screen, it helps make the challenge more manageable, and overall feels like a fun and fair unique idea, with some of the most interesting portions being relegated to optional challenges. The second of the 2 main challenges are these bubble and spike rooms. There are 2 rooms where Mega Man will be encapsulated in a bubble, and then slowly rise up as players will need to avoid insta-kill spikes. It's kinda like the insta-kill spike drops of the previous games, but in reverse and at a much slower speed. As the speed is much slower, it allows for a little more creativity in how the player has to avoid the various spikes, with many traveling back and forth across the screen as players will need to adjust with their timing. I feel like this was the team's way to try and make something new out of an old challenge, being these falling spiked walls pits, and to that end, it works. To be honest, something about the slow speed of it makes me, on a personal level, not enjoy the challenge quite as much, but I do appreciate the team doing something different here. Similar to Frost Man stage, platforming only makes up a portion of Tengu Man stage. For the first time, the other half is a shmup level. SHMUP, or STG, being short for Shoot 'em Up, typically referring to a game like Gradius or 1942. In an interview translated by Shmuplations, Mega Man series creator Akira Kitamura stated he originally wanted Mega Man to be an STG, but had to switch this due to programming limitations, which is what led to the true creation of the gameplay concept behind Mega Man. So in a way, this is a bit of a fun look into what Mega Man could have been. The shmup section mostly contains the enemies we'd seen during the platforming sequence, with some additional ones, and eventually leads players into an airship they'll have to destroy from the inside. It features some pretty standard shmup mechanics. As I mentioned earlier, enemy patterns include a sine wave, which is pretty common to see in these games as the motion of a sine wave allows for players to pretty easily destroy multiple enemies quickly if they stay in the correct spot. The airship contains attached turrets that players don't technically have to destroy, but will make the section easier if they do. And as standard to any good shmup, there are several power-ups players can collect. There's Eddie, who will drop bombs, Rush, which makes Rush Jet shoot out a spread shot, Beat, who will home and slam into enemies, delivering a powerful melee strike, similar to how he acted in Mega Man 5, and finally, Otto, who will shoot missiles out straight forwards. One of the cool things you can do here is use various boss abilities you've obtained on top of standard shooting, which would have been interesting to see really utilized to a larger capacity or full game, as I can see a lot of interesting gameplay concepts that could have come from that. As far as shmups go, this level feels like a pretty standard stage 1. Nothing is particularly challenging, and it's fun to start to feel extra powerful as Mega Man can hold on to 2 powers at once. To that end though, it is pretty basic, so it feels almost unrealized. I think similar to the snowboarding, your level of enjoyment here is going to depend on if you like the change of pace and enjoy seeing a variety of gameplay concepts, or prefer to see one concept really honed in and perfected. I actually think the shmup portion is pretty well done, but because it's only one stage, and then a future stage during the Dr. Wily portion, it's not something that ever has the chance to be truly built upon. So on one hand, as these stages never get too complex or difficult, it does serve as something that works as a quick and fun change of pace, but won't frustrate players who aren't adept at these kinds of games, and were never looking to play an STG game. However, it also doesn't play up to its full potential, and as such, for players who like STG games, or even players who want a little more challenge, this doesn't do that. So perhaps for some of those players, it may have been better if more interesting platform challenges had been put here instead. Like anything, this is all down to personal tastes. So for myself, I actually happen to like STG games quite a bit, but I also prefer Mega Man games and platform games over STG games. So while I don't dislike this portion of Tengu Man stage, I think I would have preferred more traditional Mega Man platforming, as that's the reason I bought and wanted to play a Mega Man game. Speaking of personal taste, Tengu Man stage brings up the perfect opportunity to talk about something else wholly subjective, and that's the music in Mega Man 8. While Mega Man 8 released on the same date in North America for both the PlayStation and Sega Saturn, it actually released 1 month later to the Sega Saturn in Japan. It could be this that led to a number of changes for the Sega Saturn version, or simply a matter of the console manufacturers requesting something to make their version special and seem like the ideal version to get. The Saturn version, for example, includes Woodman and Cutman, but not only are there minor stage additions, the music also changed in some stages, and Tengu Man is the perfect example of that. Tengu Man's stage on the PlayStation, and the Legacy Collection version of Mega Man 8, sounds like this. Meanwhile, Tengu Man stage on the Sega Saturn sounds like this. While Tengu Man is the most dramatic difference, Aqua Man stage is also slightly different. Here's the PlayStation version. And here's the Saturn version. Overall, the soundtrack to Mega Man 8 is probably the largest departure we've seen in style to any of the former classic Mega Man games. I'd also go as far as to say it's an even larger departure from Mega Man Classic to Mega Man X in terms of tone and style. Up to this point, the classic series had always had upbeat, driving music with a clear rock influence and some notable and incredibly catchy tracks, which makes sense given Mega Man's true Japanese name is Rock after rock and roll. However, Mega Man 8's soundtrack is dramatically different. I mean, take a listen to Swordman's theme as an example. While it's not bad per se, it no longer has that driving rock and roll feel. And overall, I could be mistaken, but I think the general sentiment is more negative towards this soundtrack for that reason. And overall, I'd agree with that sentiment. I don't straight up dislike this soundtrack, and I think it was more disappointing to me as a kid when I first got this game, as the music in the Mega Man games was something I always looked forward to. The songs aren't as memorable or catchy to me, and I think they're lacking in that driving feeling of previous games. Take a listen to the Mega Man 7 Prologue Stage music as an example. Then, take a listen to the Mega Man 8 Prologue Stage music. Whichever one you prefer is fine, but I'd argue Mega Man 7 feels more motivated and screams, "Action is ahead!" while Mega Man 8's is a little more chill. Either way, there are still some standout tracks I particularly enjoy. While I think in the battle of the two Tengu Man themes, the Saturn version is the more popular of the two, the PlayStation version is my personal favorite, and actually one of my favorite tracks in the Mega Man 8 soundtrack. I also particularly enjoy Astro Man's theme. It has a chill vibe that really meshes with me. Dr. Light's Laboratory is a nice and friendly shop theme I happen to enjoy, and while I'm not a huge fan of the North American opening song, the Japanese opening theme, Electrical Communication, kinda rocks. So I think it's a shame that was changed for the North American release. Continuing the subjectivity, let's talk about the art for Mega Man 8. While I did cover some aspects of the art earlier in this video, in particular things like the rotated background which affects the visuals and feel of the movement, I didn't cover everything. As I discussed in my Mega Man 7 video, something that Capcom did with Mega Man Classic on the Super Nintendo to distinguish itself from Mega Man X was give it a more cartoony art style. Part of this was in the proportions of the characters, making them look a little more SD, or super deformed, and part of it came down to the choice of colors. While Mega Man X uses a lot of blacks, Mega Man 7 instead opts for dark colors that appear black, but aren't quite black, giving a softer look. Mega Man 8 seemed to double down on the cartoony aesthetic. For me, nothing shows this off better than in the original run animation from Mega Man, which can be found in the prototype. Here, I'm using a video uploaded by Kitty Super Kitty Girl Dunlap 98. You can see how floppy his feet are during his run cycle as they bend around in an exaggerated and cartoony manner. The animations, in general, have far more frames than in previous games, which was likely linked to the team being given the directive to make the most of the new system's hardware. That quote from Hayato Kaji about being asked to make the most of the new hardware capabilities comes to mind. I think Video Game Animation Study does a great job talking about the animation specifically, and I'd recommend checking out the video, which I've linked in the description. For making it through a Mega Man SHMUP, players will reach Tengu Man. Unlike the previous bosses, Tengu Man will generally hover back and forth across the screen. While he's still in range to be hit by a jump attack, it does up the difficulty of him slightly, as that means players will not only have to time out jumping and attacking, but also doing so at the right time to avoid jumping into him. Tengu Man will attempt one of 3 attacks. Either he'll throw out his tornado hold at the ground, which will then track across the ground and launch Mega Man in the air if players are hit, or he'll follow up with a melee attack. He might throw out a Wind Blast, which could be his most dangerous move, as it can bring players right off the edge of the stage and into an insta-death. Or he'll fly down and swoop across the screen, trying to headbutt the player. He follows this up by flying straight down at the stage, which feels more like it's meant to be an opportunity for players to attack him easily rather than an actual attack. Like the bosses before, his pattern is pretty simple to deal with once players recognize it, and he, again, feels wholly unique compared to the other bosses. His battle feels, to me, a bit like a more glass cannon type of boss fight. It's not that his attacks are necessarily more powerful, but he has fewer attacks players need to recognize, and the punishment can be much more dire, especially in the case of his wind attack that can insta-kill players. So, to that extent, I think it's a nice change of pace here in this arrangement of bosses that makes Tengu Man feel even more unique. So, to my opinion, another great boss fight here overall, albeit maybe a little easy. Frostman's Ice Wave is a bit of an interesting weakness here, as it defies what seems to be a usual convention for Mega Man boss weakness logic. Tengu Man is weak to Ice Wave, but Ice Wave only attacks along the ground, and Tengu Man is rarely near the ground as he hovers back and forth throughout the air. The attack is definitely powerful, as if players hit Tengu Man with it at the end of his swooping attack, they'll be able to freeze him in place and hit him with it at least one more time. But players won't be able to use the attack, really, at any other point during the battle. I mean, you can sneak it in during the beginning of the swoop attack, but that's still specifically during this one attack. Players are, of course, still free to attack with other weapons or the Mega Buster while waiting it out for this attack, but that does make it stand out compared to prior Mega Man games, like Mega Man 5, as an example, where it seems like the boss weaknesses were specifically designed with the boss in mind. In the past, if there was a flying enemy or high jumping enemy, they were typically weak to something that launched upwards, as that would make sense. Think Crash Man from Mega Man 2 being weak to Airman's air shooter, or Cloud Man from Mega Man 7 being weak to Burst Man's danger wrap. So I'm not really sure how I feel about Ice Wave being the weakness to Tengu Man, as there's a lot of waiting around if you really want to use it. They made it seem like it makes sense by having it stick Tengu Man to the ground if it hits him, but in the way that the ability functions and the way that Tengu Man acts with this constant hovering, it's not an ideal boss weakness here. And hey, maybe that was the point. Maybe they wanted something that was a little more difficult to utilize in this case to make the boss weakness both more unique and less viable at the same time. So I'll turn it to you. What are your thoughts? Should the weaknesses generally function in a way that's ideal for the boss you're facing, a la my other examples, or should they require a little more thought and specific usage, a la Tengu Man here, or maybe a mix of both? At the end of the day, it's going to be down to preference, but I think, especially given these weaknesses can be an important thing for struggling players, I lean towards thinking the functionality of the boss weaknesses should nicely match up with dealing with the boss that's weak to it, at least in the case of Mega Man games. With Tengu Man defeated, players will obtain his Tornado Hold, and with that, and 4 stages complete, we reach the halfway point and a cutscene. Dr. Light assesses the skull baubles Mega Man has been collecting from Wily robots are energy sources from outside the Earth. With that, they're able to trace where another similar energy source is coming from and discuss heading out to the location of a new energy source that's appeared on their radar. Meanwhile, Duo, who Dr. Light has been treating, finally wakes up and breaks out, so Mega Man instead goes to chase after him. This leads to a mini-stage that's far shorter than the Prologue Stage. Really, it seems to mainly serve as a way to have a boss fight, with the team deciding to attach a mini-stage to it, similar to the Robot Museum of Mega Man 7. The mini-stage is mostly unremarkable, but it does have some hidden bolts. The first screen players will reach after entering the stage has a ladder that can only be reached with a special ability. So, for players who haven't figured out the boss abilities will help them access secret locations, this will hopefully serve as a reminder to that. Take the ladder up, and on most versions of the game, this will lead to 2 bolts. Although, there is a unique encounter on the Sega Saturn version, with this leading to Cut Man. However, I'll get to the unique Sega Saturn encounters altogether later in the video. For traveling down the stage, players will reach Duo. Duo is the best of lads on an important mission. So, of course, instead of just talking, Mega Man and Duo duke it out. His attacks consist of turning into a meteor and bouncing around the screen, or punching the ground with a minor AoE around it. Otherwise, he'll hop around in order to move, and that's about it. I tried experimenting with all of the weapons to see if there was one he was particularly weak to, but without a health bar, I honestly wasn't sure, and it all felt about the same as the Mega Buster to me. Beyond story beats, a mid-game boss like this can serve as a nice skill check before players reach the latter half of the game. So how does Duo do? Well, I think more so than anything, Duo's moveset really encourages players to slide. He's not particularly difficult, in my opinion, but reading angled attacks, like his bouncing meteor attack, can be a challenge, so it does ask players to have reached a skill level where they can react to these angles and understand how sliding functions. So, to that end, while he's not the most challenging, I think it works as a fine skill check most players should be able to overcome, especially at this point in the game, that at least asks for one important skill, that of sliding, to be relatively mastered. For defeating Duo, the two realize each other are probably okay, but as Proto Man interrupts the battle, Duo bursts ahead to Wily Tower on his mission. Mega Man and Rush follow, only for Mega Man to almost be defeated by one of Wily's giant robots. As far as in-game cutscenes go, which are obviously pretty lacking up to this point, this is definitely the closest Mega Man gets to biting the dust. That is, before Duo saves him and finally explains his mission.
My name is Duo. I was born with the sole purpose to eliminate the evil energy from this universe.
Not sure why he couldn't just say that before, but you know. Unfortunately, Duo and Mega Man can't make it into Wily Tower as there's a barrier protecting it, so that leads to Mega Man's new mission and the second half of the game, destroying the energy sources that are generating the Wily Tower barrier. With that, 4 new stages become available as well as new items in the shop. The bosses here are primarily weak to each other. Astro Man is weak to Search Man is weak to Sword Man is weak to Aqua Man, and Aqua Man is weak to Astro Man. So for the sake of this playthrough, I ended up choosing to go to Astro Man first. Astro Man Stage is, in some ways, the timing and puzzle stage of Mega Man 8. As per the theme of the game, it seems like the devs really went all in on experimenting with different ways to do Mega Man challenges. I wouldn't say that Astro Man's theme is entirely consistent though. The beginning and halfway point of the stage consist of timing-based challenges, with giant flowers with clocks on them really hammering in that theme. I'm marking this as being somewhat of a puzzle, because players will have to puzzle out the timing of various platforms that fade in and out of existence to the timing of a rotating sun/moon in the background. The other main challenge of this stage are 2 looping puzzle rooms. Again, I'm using puzzle a little loosely here. It's a much slower challenge where really it's just players finding when and where to activate platforms, and maybe using Tengu Man's tornado hold to boost up to a higher platform. Finally, instead of a sub-boss, there's one timing challenge where players will have to platform up a sinking tower without touching the bottom. This is the same concept we'd seen before in Mega Man 5 with elevators or collapsing towers, but more refined as technology had gotten better by this point. The disappearing platform sequence happens once before the midway point and once afterwards, with the second one being drastically more challenging than the first. In the first, being on the platforms mainly prevents players from needing to deal with enemies on the ground. While these enemies can be easily dealt with utilizing Frostman's Ice Wave attack, it could serve as a slight challenge for players who don't realize that. The second version instead sets many of these platforms over instant death pits, with a large helping of Ururuuns to make traversal even more challenging. While the tick up in difficulty is standard, I honestly can't help but feel like this entire section is a little bland and uninteresting. The platforms always appear and disappear at the exact same time, no matter what. This is one of those challenges you'd think would include added complexity, where some platforms appear when the sun is showing, and other platforms appear while the star is showing, but that isn't the case here, and as a result, these are either challenges that are way too simple, or challenges that run the risk of being a little tedious as your timing has to be so precise. There's one particular sequence of 4 platforms where you're asked to quickly hop from one to the next, and if you mess up, that's a lost life. That's fine, but it's something where, because Mega Man feels so sluggish in Mega Man 8, at least to me, it feels like it's not entirely my fault when I die. I mean, it is, but because he feels slow, it tricks me into thinking it's a run speed issue and not a timing issue on my part. This whole section makes me think back to Magnet Man's stage in Mega Man 3. It's a disappearing block challenge, which I'd say is somewhat similar, and it's also an easy one. But it's much more interesting, because the different timing of the blocks makes you think a little more. On top of that, there's different solutions, with some that seem challenging at first glance, but turn out to have far more easy routes that players can spot and notice, which then becomes rewarding. There's nothing like that here in Astro Man Stage, so as a result, it feels less clever to me. The other main challenges in the stage are these 2 areas where players will need to explore around an area that loops both horizontally and vertically in order to find and reach the exit. The idea itself is pretty clever, so I can understand why the team decided to include it. But it's one of those ideas that's clever, however, in practice, I don't think it works as well as the idea sounded, or at the very least, it needed more time. Or honestly, maybe it just doesn't fit within Mega Man, as these areas are about searching for buttons that players need to press that will raise or lower walls so they can reach the exit and/or bolts. This section brings the action to a crawl. While this is a puzzle, nothing about this is particularly challenging. You're just blindly searching for the thing you have to hit and hitting it. At the same time, the platforming and enemies are simple to allow for players to freely search without getting too frustrated. What it results in is a puzzle sequence that's bland because there's no challenge, and a platforming sequence that's bland because there's no challenge. I imagine for some people, the chill pacing of this and lack of true challenge might be a welcome relief, or a nice change of pace at the very least. However, I'm not one of them. I don't think ramping up the platforming would have worked here, but I do think it needed a more interesting puzzle to actually feel like there's a reason for these areas that isn't padding. That said, ramping up the puzzles would have potentially turned off people who don't like puzzle games. So, in a way, this is sort of like the shmup area I discussed before, which was such a simple shmup, it might not hit the highs for people who love shmups, and might feel unwelcome or out of place for people who dislike shmups. The final piece to this stage is the vertical climb through a sinking tower. The difficult thing about designing this type of challenge, I imagine, is trying to balance the speed and obstacles to be easy enough to read so players can fairly make it through this without dying, but still maintain a level of challenge. An additional goal, I'd think, is to induce a feeling of panic, as there's this constant timer and players can't relax at any point. So to that end, it also plays into the time theme of the stage. I think all of this is handled fairly well. Mega Man isn't the most mobile character, so to that end, I think there's only so much you can do with this type of challenge to make it feel fun. It's the type of challenge that invites quick precision jumping and reacting, and here the team opted once again to cater to a broader audience. If I were to make this challenge to my personal tastes, it would probably have a much more constant stream of precision platforming, as much as you can really do in Mega Man, on top of introduced precision shooting. Perhaps there are gates that Mega Man has to shoot in order to open, somewhat like Search Man stage, so you're always on your toes. All in all, while this stage has one of my favorite songs of Mega Man 8, this is probably one of my least favorite stages of Mega Man 8. I don't find the disappearing platform segment all that interesting, or think it was handled very well, and I find the looping puzzle sequence to be bland and boring. The vertical climb is okay, but to my taste, could have included a little more challenge to it. Make it through Astro Man's mostly timing-based challenges, and you'll reach the titular robot master. Astro Man has 2 defensive balls that continuously circle around him. In one of his attacks, he'll fly down and the balls will circle in a much larger arc, with Mega Man needing to jump over them while attacking him, or hide at the side of the screen. To make matters more complicated, they'll take turns shooting projectiles at Mega Man. His other more simple attack is floating down and back up while moving in one direction or another, creating an easy chance to get a hit in. These aren't too challenging, but what can be is his final attack, Astro Crush. Every so often, he'll start rapidly appearing in different parts of the screen, and then finally hurl down a series of meteors. Thanks to the fact that him appearing in and out all seems to last around 1 frame, my recording software often didn't pick it up, so that's cool. The meteors seem to hurl down everywhere, and without rhyme or reason, so it would lead a keen-eyed player to conclude that there has to be a tell somewhere, likely in the portion where he rapidly moves around. That said, I'm embarrassed to say, even on replaying a number of times, I couldn't figure out how this tell worked, and without knowing it, the Astro Crush is a brutal attack and very difficult to avoid. It's not the worst thing if you're playing Astro Man normally, as you should be able to deal enough damage from your Mega Buster or his weakness to defeat him even if you do get regularly hit by the Astro Crush. But I was trying to defeat Astro Man pellet only, and have been for all of these bosses, in order to better study their movesets. And this was definitely the one I had the most trouble with. But because that was such a specific limitation I gave myself, I don't really mind this attack and think it's fine that it's on the more challenging side, especially considering Astro Man is a boss in the second half of the game, and hey, if you use his weakness of Search Man's Search Missiles, you can absolutely obliterate him with those even if you're struggling, as they'll make him flinch and pause and you can stun lock him to death. In terms of how the Astro Crush works, I had to look up a strategy and found one by Hunam1 on YouTube. As it turns out, I was correct that there's a tell happening during the flash teleport sequence. The final location Astro Man briefly appears is a safe spot Mega Man can run to and wait at. Not sure how I missed that one, as it seems like it should be clear, but maybe something about the chaos of Astro Crush threw me off the trail. Even with this one more challenging attack, I like that, like the other Robot Masters so far, Astro Man feels totally unique compared to the rest and continues to fill out the roster nicely. For defeating Astro Man, players will receive his powerful Astro Crush attack. So after spending time in an outer space simulation, time to dive deep into the water with Aqua Man. Aqua Man's stage is almost entirely underwater, utilizing the brand new swimming mechanic of Mega Man 8. Instead of water altering Mega Man's jump height, Mega Man will swim by tapping the jump button, a la Mario or Donkey Kong, but I'll touch on the mechanic a little more in its own section. The underwater sections themselves are mostly pretty tame, with not too much to note. There are, however, a few sections with insta-kill spikes that do serve as sudden jumps in difficulty and feel a little more Mega Man to me, as they require a little more precision than most of this stage. There's a portion during the first half where bubbles will slowly force players back as they swim, and they'll have to deal with spikes on both the ceiling and ground, which feels particularly precarious. Like some of the other stages, this one feels a little more exploratory, with some of the most interesting aspects being related to utilizing boss abilities. With the Astro Crush we just picked up, you can destroy a ceiling that, somehow raises the water level. This not only leads to a bolt, but also an alternate second path with its own optional bolt. Although there's also a bolt from taking the normal path, meaning this is a level you'll have to repeat playing if you want to 100% the game. Another one of the more interesting bolts comes from utilizing Tengu Man's tornado hold to raise up a spike, opening up a path. The final unique sequence of this stage is a long drop through exploding timer bombs and insta-kill spikes. On the whole, this area is well done. The insta-kill spikes are used in tandem with the timer bombs to ensure players will get a chance to see them and choose where to fall without this ever being unfair. Oftentimes, the spikes will be at the edge of the screen, but still in view. The time bombs create the perfect way to ensure players can't take too much time, need to quickly assess the situation, and then react. There's also bombs that drop and walk around while the timer goes off, which are also used in creative ways. At one point, these bombs will drop onto a ledge, giving players more time to think and react, while at another point, these could drop Mega Man into an insta-kill spike, meaning players will need to react and quickly hop off. My only critique of this area is in how the bolts are handled. There are two versions of this dropping sequence depending on which of the alternate paths players choose to take, with each one containing a bolt. But, in both cases, the bolt can be missed as the ledge with a bolt isn't telegraphed to the player. It's not the end of the world, but I do think this should have been better communicated and not easily missable at no fault of the player. All in all, I think this level is pretty well done, although I do think the swimming mechanic could have been played with a little bit more. As it stands, there's nothing about it that's utilized in this stage that makes it feel like a necessary change from how water worked in prior games. Speaking of this swimming mechanic, I did want to touch on it a little further. As I noted, all prior Mega Man games, minus Mega Man 1, had water function in a very specific way that was unique to the Mega Man series when it first came out. Instead of players swimming, water would make it so Mega Man could jump up indefinitely and to the top of the water. This allowed for unique platforming sequences and challenges, and a nice change up to the standard Mega Man control scheme. However, as much as I like that choice and prefer it over swimming, by Mega Man 8, many of those challenges started to be noticeably repeated. Multiple games had the idea of there's insta-kill spikes above Mega Man, and eventually, insta-kill spikes above and below, meaning players would have to perform the perfect jump using the extra height of water, or get hit by an enemy and use iframes to make it. So I suppose this could have been what led the team to switch up the water mechanic to make it so players instead swim. Like Mario or Donkey Kong Country, if players tap the jump button, they'll swim up. Otherwise, they'll slowly sink down, all making it so Mega Man can perpetually stay off the ground. I've never been the biggest fan of water levels in most platforming games, as I feel like it really slows down the action, and find the general land-based platforming of the games to be more fun. That's not a particularly hot take, and I think that's a fairly common sentiment. So it's one of those things where I always really liked that Mega Man didn't do this, and was pretty disappointed that Mega Man 8 decided to go with the standard swimming of other platform games. It's not bad per se, but it's not my personal preference. It is worth noting that players run on the ground normally, and if they jump, it still does maintain the normal mechanics of prior Mega Man games, with Mega Man getting a much higher jump. But by adding the swimming on top of it, that means that the level and structure has to completely change to incorporate this altered mechanic. While I do think it's pretty clear that the team had been running out of ideas for how to handle water stages in the Mega Man games, Mega Man 8 does present something unique and different, and that's in the fact that the levels scroll both vertically and horizontally. so I think it could have opened up a pretty interesting opportunity to have players vertically traversing through water using this new scrolling and the original water mechanic, or a similar water mechanic to Mega Man X, where players jump much higher in water, but not necessarily all the way up. And hey, for all I know, that could have been another reason for the change-up. Perhaps the team wanted to both utilize horizontal and vertical screen scrolling, but differentiate Mega Man 8 from the X series, and therefore chose swimming. Halfway through Aqua Man's stage, players will come across the game's third sub-boss in Gorone. This is a unique fight from anything else we've seen yet in classic Mega Man, with the entire fight taking place as Mega Man is falling down a waterfall. While generally, Mega Man is constantly falling in this fight, there are logs that appear Mega Man can jump on, which will help players both properly attack Gorone and avoid its attacks. Gorone will either attempt to swim into Mega Man from the side of the waterfall, punch Mega Man from the side, or drop a weighted object from above, with players only able to attack Gorone when it comes out of the water. At first, this was a fight that I honestly found to be pretty annoying, as there is an occasional amount of waiting involved for when Gorone submerges underwater or travels off screen. But in replaying this fight multiple times, I've come to really appreciate it, and think it actually might be my favorite of the sub-bosses in Mega Man 8 because of how unique it is. At first, the fight can feel potentially unfair, as so much of how well players can deal with each situation is based on how many logs there are and what has or hasn't been destroyed. But I found that I actually was able to strategize against Gorone as I better learned its patterns, and it was an enjoyable learning process. And really, that's the mark of a good battle. If something seems overwhelming or too challenging at first, but can be mastered, it's the type of design that I happen to find incredibly satisfying. Moving on to another unique fight of Mega Man 8, for completing the stage, players will reach Aqua Man. Aqua Man is very much a pattern recognition boss fight, and really going against a lot of what your intuition might be. Up until this point, jumping was a key mechanic to avoiding a boss's attacks. But with Aqua Man, every attack is best handled by running, standing still, or occasionally sliding. It really turns the standard battle on its head in that way. If Aqua Man launches his water balloons, it's an arching projectile which he lobs at a distance, then slowly closer to himself, creating a window players can run underneath and be completely safe. If he shoots his water cannon, he'll shoot water out in a 90-degree pattern, with it sometimes traveling up and sometimes down. That means if players jump, they might get hit, but if players are standing in the correct spot, it will almost always travel above or below the player, meaning they'll usually be safe if they don't panic and jump. The one exception to this is if the attack happens near the wall, in which case it doesn't have time to travel up or down, and the player will need to jump. Aqua Man's final water attack is his water column, where he'll land from a jump and cause a column of water to shoot up, then collapse. The location has a tell, with ample time to run or slide away. The only danger here is he might jump into the player while the column is splashing down, but in my testing, it seemed like there was always time to avoid him with a slide. And that brings me to his final attack, which is just jumping around in order to hit the player, where, again, the best way to avoid this is running and or sliding. So to that end, Aqua Man is yet another completely unique boss, which really plays up that if players panic and jump around, that's going to put them in the most trouble. With other boss fights, that might cause players to accidentally save themselves, but the opposite is true here. Stay calm and grounded, and he really isn't all that challenging. So another great boss fight in the Mega Man 8 repertoire. If players are struggling, they can use Astro Man's Astro Crush, which will really just obliterate Aqua Man. So even if this is a fight players are panicking and struggling with, they still have another option. For defeating Aqua Man, players will obtain his water balloon. So it's time to put those water balloons to use and head into Swordman Stage. Swordman Stage is yet another incredibly unique stage to Mega Man 8 that very specifically plays with the concept that the first 4 weapons players unlocked can help in Traversal. So after players enter into Swordman's lair, the first half of the stage consists of 4 different puzzle rooms players can traverse to in any order. At first, this really threw me off because I'd honestly forgotten that some of the weapons could be used for traversal, and this stage absolutely requires it, so it definitely serves as a nice way to force players to learn. Conceptually, I like this idea quite a bit. It's different, it's unique, and it really stands out. The Thunderclaw is used in a room with a collapsing ceiling and floor in order to traverse across gaps. The Tornado Hold is used to raise up a connector piece in order to open the path ahead. The Ice Wave is used to freeze lava pillars that shoot up. And finally, the Flash Bomb is used to light up a series of rooms so players can see the back in order to understand the correct image sequence for an upcoming puzzle. None of these are too difficult, but for the first half of the stage, I don't mind, as I like the unique usage of all of the weapons. The only room that's lacking here is the Flash Bomb puzzle. Players can make it to the end area without ever realizing or noticing that Flash Bomb lights up the walls. And if players haven't noticed this, it really just becomes a simple guessing game of which order to press 3 buttons in, with the wrong order resulting in some enemies dropping. It's not all that punishing, and I don't think it's going to necessarily make players realize they can light up the previous rooms if they reach this area. Really, I think what this area needed was a first room that was entirely enclosed, which somehow forces players to use the Flash Bomb. While the first half of Swordman's stage is incredibly unique, the second half is a pretty standard feeling challenge, with players needing to ride on a platform they can control over insta-kill lava and lava geysers. The geysers will raise the platform up, so players will need to control the platform at the proper pace in order to progress without dying. While I think this challenge is fine, and I actually mentioned it in my Mega Man 6 video as a better exploration of one of the challenges in Flame Man stage, I really think this level would have been better served by having the second half completely redone, and instead combine all of what the first half of the stage taught players. You get this really great exploration of how to use boss abilities for traversal, and since it's all required individually, there's a great opportunity here to have the second half of the stage include challenges that put together various boss abilities for completely unique challenges. So while I do think the stage has good concepts, I do also think there was a more interesting idea right on the cusp here. Swordman's stage has the fourth and final sub-boss, this time being the Gearna Eye. The Gearna Eye rolls vertically along the side of the wall, occasionally opening up to reveal its weak point while shooting fireballs at Mega Man. Halfway through the fight, the platform Mega Man is on will break beneath him, making for a more precarious fight as players will have to jump from platform to platform over a lava pit, all while still fighting the Gearna Eye, and also have to deal with a hammer that will occasionally smash one of the platforms into the lava. The boss somewhat reminds me of the Cockroach Twin battle from Mega Man 4, where, similarly, players had to fight off against a boss they could only occasionally attack, all while jumping from platform to platform over an insta-death trap. To my taste, I find the Gearna Eye more tedious than fun, maybe because of all the waiting around. That doesn't mean it's bad or poorly designed. I think the fight is fine from that perspective. It's unique and completely fair, it just isn't my cup of tea. Coming to a fight I do like, for finishing his stage, you'll reach Swordman. Swordman looks visually intimidating thanks to his size, but I actually find his battle to be one of, if not the easiest, boss battles in Mega Man 8. Swordman's body consists of two parts, his leg and torso, with players only able to hurt him by attacking his torso. He'll then use that aspect of his design to attack players in unique ways. In one attack, his torso spins around and players will have to slide underneath to avoid the spinning torso, while not going too far in order to avoid his legs. In another attack, his legs will dash across the screen at the player, while his body launches and hovers above, all before reattaching and swinging his sword. Here, players will need to jump over the dash and then clear off to the other side in order to avoid his slash attack. Practically speaking, it's a simple dash attack, but visually more interesting. Swordman will also call forth a pillar of flames around him, which really is a simple defensive move. Finally, he'll occasionally jump up to the wall, which will cause a giant statue to fall, with players needing to slide away from where they were standing in order to avoid the falling statue. The reason I find him so simple is because all of his attacks have major tells, which gives players ample time to react. I could be mistaken, but I think his tells might be more drawn out than many of the other Robot Masters, and they're all simple enough to avoid when you know what to look for. While he is on the easier side, I still find the fight to be fun because, to my taste, learning and reacting to tells is fun to do, and that's what this fight is all about. Not that other boss fights aren't, but in a way, I find this fight to be less reactionary because of how long the tells are. If players are struggling, Aqua Man's water balloon will not only deal a hefty amount of damage to Swordman, but also stun him if it's used during his fire shield. For defeating Swordman, players will obtain his Flame Sword, which leads us to the final robot master of Mega Man 8, Searchman. Searchman's stage is an interesting one that combines the briefly touched on concept of Slashman's stage from Mega Man 7 with foreground elements blocking players' vision, alongside really playing with obstacles revolving around Clown Man's Thunderclaw. The first half of the stage is designed as a much more exploratory series of open areas. Right off the bat, there are grips for utilizing the Thunderclaw, including several spots where the Tornado Hold and Flame Sword come in handy for grabbing bolts. It's really designed as a bit more of a playground and light on specific challenges, with players pretty open to explore in different ways or take different paths unless they're going for a specific bolt. This area in particular also takes the idea we'd seen in Slashman's stage of various flora in the foreground blocking Mega Man's view, but uses it in a much more interesting way. If players fail to properly use the Thunderclaw while jumping through the first area, they'll fall to an area where the foreground blocks the view of various enemies, and there's even a hidden bolt behind some of this flora. This is what I was hoping to see a little more of in Slashman's stage, and I'm glad to see it utilized here and designed against. The second half of the stage is particularly interesting, as it introduces gates that can only be temporarily opened if Mega Man shoots them, and then after a set time, will close again. This concept is then cleverly combined with the Thunderclaw to make challenges where players will need to swing over spikes, then quickly open the path forwards. It's a neat little pocket challenge in the stage, and while it could have been expanded and made more difficult, the amount it's used here feels right to me, without ever getting into frustratingly difficult territory. On the whole, I think Searchman's stage is one of my favorites of Mega Man 8, and I do like how much it plays with the idea of players needing to utilize the Thunderclaw, which really makes the stage stand out. Make it through all of the Thunderclaw challenges, and players will reach Searchman. Searchman might just be the most challenging robot master of Mega Man 8. He'll either jump up and shoot a series of missiles downwards, with small gaps players can run to in order to avoid getting hurt, or he'll jump up and shoot a spiked disc players will need to avoid. The spiked disc, in particular, can be challenging to read and avoid, feeling a bit like a dangerous air hockey disc. Although I did find that the side of the stage was the best bet for avoiding these, making it so you should just need to jump over it once at the side and be done with it. That said, because Searchman can hop around to various points of the stage, the side of the stage can still be a dangerous spot. Searchman's main attack involves him hiding in one of 3 bushes, while targets will attempt to find Mega Man. If players avoid the target, he'll pop out of the bush he was hiding in, and perform his easier to avoid upwards missiles. If players get caught in the target, he'll utilize his homing sniper attack, which sends out a far more difficult to avoid set of missiles that, as the name suggests, home in on and track Mega Man. The final attack is his Deadly Storm, which he'll only perform once he's low enough on health. While he can be rapidly attacked during this, he'll pause briefly in the air before using the attack, giving players a chance to slide to his other side and avoid the attack entirely. While all of these attacks are readable, there's limited space in where players can go to avoid them, and that safe zone is constantly changing. The targets can also be tricky to avoid, and if players get caught in them, homing sniper can be challenging to avoid getting hurt by. To add to that, even Searchman's weakness of Flame Sword is a little tricky. It's specifically useful when Searchman hides away behind the 3 bushes, but as it's a melee attack, you can only attack 1 to 2 at a time, and if you choose wrong, you'll probably end up in the crosshairs of the targets and get nailed by his homing sniper. If you do choose properly, the attack is definitely powerful, but that increased risk of getting hit by the homing sniper makes it a bit more of a dangerous trade-off. Searchman is once again a really well-designed and totally unique boss fight compared to the rest. While I've had complaints with some of the stages and mechanic shifts of Mega Man 8, the Robot Masters are all fantastic and definitely a highlight. After defeating Searchman, players will obtain his homing sniper, and now that all of the Robot Masters are defeated, Wily Tower will open up for players to head to. But before moving on to Wily Tower, now that we have all of the weapons, I'll give my takes on all of them. To give my usual spiel here, I've always liked playing the Mega Man games Buster only, even as a kid, so it's been specifically for these videos that I've been toying around with all of the Robot Master abilities, meaning this isn't a lifetime of knowledge coming at you, but some fairly fresh takes. Right at the start, during the Prologue stage, players will obtain the Mega Ball. The Mega Ball kicks out at an angle after players attack it, bouncing off of walls. While it's not directly stated, players can also adjust the angle it's kicked at utilizing the control pad. As I mentioned in my Mega Man 3 video, this ability reminds me of Gemini Man's Gemini Laser, but better as it's a quicker attack. On top of that, while the Gemini Laser starts horizontal before bouncing at an angle, kicking the Mega Ball at an immediate angle makes it easier to register how it will react and bounce, and feel like players are in more control. I think it's actually one of the most fun weapons to use of the new set of weapons in Mega Man 8, which might be why the team gave it to players right off the bat. It's a great weapon for hitting enemies above players, but is nicely balanced because it's angled, making it a little more difficult to utilize and master. For defeating Clown Man, players will obtain his Thunder Claw. From a pure attacking standpoint, the Thunder Claw is one of the least interesting weapons. It whips forwards and back at a limited range, and that's about it. But from a movement standpoint, it's probably the most interesting weapon in Mega Man 8. This is one of those weapons that will have lovers and haters for that reason. If Mega Man 8 didn't have a second half that required the use of Thunder Claw, and its only use was for the occasional optional bolt, I wouldn't like it at all. But because the game is split into two halves, and there are interesting uses for it during the second half, I actually like this weapon a lot and find it to be one of my favorite of Mega Man 8, especially considering I'm someone who doesn't tend to use the Robot Master weapons. Something with functionality like this is definitely my personal preference. For defeating Grenade Man, players will obtain his Flash Bomb. While the Flash Bomb does have some minor uses for obtaining special bolts, really it's more of an offensive-based weapon, and probably one of the best ones in Mega Man 8 thanks to its constant AoE once it explodes. Thanks to it being a genuinely practical weapon to use and having a nice healthy amount of ammo, this is definitely one of the more fun weapons to use. Granted, I wouldn't call it particularly interesting. For defeating Frostman, players will obtain his Ice Wave. Unlike the Flash Bomb, this weapon is interesting and I think really well done. Similar to Wave Man's Water Wave in Mega Man 5, the Ice Wave will travel straight down into the ground and then run along the ground hitting enemies. However, whereas the Water Wave felt pretty weak due to the fact it could only travel down, and it also just wasn't that strong of an attack, the Ice Wave corrects those issues. The Ice Wave is powerful and can even travel up walls so long as the attack first hits the ground. To balance it out, the attack is stronger after it touches the ground rather than while Mega Man is dropping the attack. On top of that, Ice Wave happens to be particularly useful against a number of enemies, in particular the Crunchron and Gabioal, which makes the Ice Wave feel even more like a worthwhile addition to Mega Man's roster. The only unfortunate thing about the weapon is that, while the team came up with an interesting use for it to help with Traversal, as seen in Swordman stage, that's the only time the Ice Wave is ever used to freeze lava, and that's a shame. For defeating Tengu Man, players will obtain his Tornado Hold. The Tornado Hold is probably the best weapon in terms of being both practical for fighting enemies and having a unique ability to help Mega Man with Traversal. If players jump into the tornado the attack creates, it'll allow Mega Man to float up and reach new heights. At the same time, the attack acts as Mega Man's vertical attack and is therefore useful against flying enemies. It's even helpful against other general enemies on the ground as it creates a wall they can't cross and rapidly hits whoever walks into its path. On the whole, this is probably the best all-around weapon for that reason. For defeating Astro Man, players will obtain his Astro Crush. The Astro Crush is pretty similar to the various full-screen attacks we'd seen before, whether that be Toad Man's Rain Flush, Gravity Man's Gravity Hold, or Centaur Man's Centaur Flash. Astro Crush has the least amount of weapon energy of all of these, but it's also the most powerful. So in that way, even though it only has 4 shots, it still feels well balanced. There's also weapon energy drops everywhere in Mega Man 8, so even if you feel limited with it, it's not like you'll be out of ammo all that long with it equipped. I think of all of these, Rain Flush still feels the best balanced to me, and therefore the most fun to use, but at least Astro Crush has a purpose of being a quick murder-everything weapon. For defeating Aqua Man, players will obtain his Water Balloon. The Water Balloon is a lob shot that players can quickly shoot out without worrying about how many balloons are on screen at once. So in that way, it's somewhat akin to Quick Man's Quick Boomerang. While it's a rapid-fire weapon, I honestly didn't notice that while testing it, so I found it to be one of the least enjoyable of the weapons to use, as it felt like it wasn't as powerful as something like the Flash Bomb, but also not all that different from Mega Man's standard attack. As it's a lob, you can hit enemies a little lower than you, but really, the instances where that actually matters is pretty limited. For defeating Sword Man, players will obtain his Flame Sword. This is a melee attack where players will be forced to stay stationary while using it if they're grounded. Due to both its range limitation and being forced to stay still on the ground while using it, it's balanced by being more powerful. This is the perfect way to balance a weapon like this, but I honestly didn't notice it being any more powerful than any of the other special weapons. So while I don't mind the melee range limitation in theory, practically speaking, when you have so many better ranged options, it felt like a pretty obsolete weapon option to me. For defeating Searchman, players will obtain his Homing Sniper. As the name implies, it homes in on enemies, similar to, say, Dive Man's Dive Missile from Mega Man 4. Although, if you charge it, it actually locks onto multiple enemies, which I didn't notice while initially testing it, and is a super cool addition to this attack. The only real limitation is oftentimes the ground and wall will block a missile and destroy it, making the attack not so overpowered and, really, serving as a nice way to balance it. Like any homing attack, it's fun to use as you can kinda just run and spray out attacks without thinking too much. All in all, I think Mega Man 8 has a nice collection of weapons. I don't find the weapons as fun or creative as some of the weapons in Mega Man 7, nor do I think they're as well balanced as Mega Man 4, which definitely feels like the high point so far in that case. But I appreciate the attempt to double many of them as traversal tools, and think Mega Man 8's weapon set still stands out as one of the better ones so far. There's one more mechanic change up to Mega Man 8 I have yet to mention, and I saved talking about it for now as it's based on the weapons. In all of the prior Mega Man games, if a player utilizes their weapon ammo, there's only a few ways to recharge it. Either finish the stage you're in, find weapon ammo, or get a game over. Some games were even more strict with this limitation, like Mega Man 2, which makes the weapon ammo usage carry over throughout the Dr. Wily stages. However, in a major change-up, Mega Man 8 makes it so weapon ammo automatically recharges upon death. Outside of the intended balance, which is probably why weapon ammo didn't recharge unless players got a game over in the past, this really feels like a necessary change-up for Mega Man 8, thanks to the fact that various stages require players utilize their weapons to proceed. It would feel absolutely unfair if players used their weapon ammo up to get past a required weapon mobility challenge, died to a later challenge, and then couldn't get back because they'd already used up all of their ammo, and therefore needed to repeatedly die until getting a game over. It's also an unnecessary hurdle that really slows down the game. So from that standpoint, this was definitely a nice change. But beyond that, as I talked about in previous videos, not letting weapons recharge on death came with a pretty large number of drawbacks. If players are fighting a boss and using their weakness, then die, they'll be out of chances against that boss using their weakness again. It then forces struggling players to try to attempt a boss Mega Buster only, for better or worse. On one hand, this should hopefully lead players to improve as they'll be forced to better learn a boss's patterns and strategies. But on the other, if a player is using the boss ability to beat them, they probably felt like they needed it, and dying to a boss while running out of their weakness can feel absolutely devastating. For many players, it could mean they'll absolutely get a game over, and then have to play the entire stage all over again. It definitely adds tension, which can be a plus, but I imagine most players would find that to be incredibly frustrating. For someone like me, who doesn't like to use boss weapons because I don't generally like using limited resources in games, it feels even more limited because of how easy it is to use up that resource. As a kid, I'd always save my boss weapons for an upcoming boss fight, just in case I needed it, because I knew running out of ammo could screw me over. It was absolutely a deterrent for me to ever experiment and have fun with those weapons. So, Mega Man 8 feels really freeing in that way. For someone who doesn't particularly like using limited resources, like myself, because I know how easy it is to refill that limited resource, I don't internally feel like I'm wasting ammo when I use those weapons. But there is a notable drawback in just how easy it is to go all out using special weapons and never feel the need to use your Mega Buster again. The game doesn't feel as balanced in that way. For some people, that's great, and for someone like myself who generally prefers playing Mega Buster only, it's not like you can't play the more challenging way if you so choose. But it is worth noting, as most design choices will come with both pros and cons, and ultimately, it's all about the experience you want to deliver to players, or at least hope to deliver to players. Before moving on to Dr. Wily, I do want to note some specific version differences between the Sega Saturn and not just the PlayStation version, but every other version of Mega Man 8, as they all seem to be based on the PlayStation version, at least to my understanding. While I've mostly been recording footage from Legacy Collection 2, a long time ago, my little brother picked up Mega Man 8 for our Sega Saturn, so I decided to do a fourth run-through of Mega Man 8 for this video. I was really doing it to play against Cutman and Woodman, but in playing through, I kept on noticing minor level design differences. It's all led me to think that the Sega Saturn is the more challenging version of the game. Let's take a look at Frostman Stage as one example. During the snowboard sequence, there's a minor change that makes the Sega Saturn version more difficult. At the end of the snowboard sequence in the Legacy Collection, you can see spiked gates closing down. I assumed this was just a cool visual while playing, and kind of forgot about it, until it killed me in the Saturn version. While I can't say if the spikes come down faster in the Saturn version, what I can say is that only 4 spikes come out in the Legacy Collection version, whereas the Saturn version has 7 spikes closing in on players, immediately making this more difficult with more space players will have to clear. Another minor example comes in Tengu Man Stage. Let's take a look at how to get the first bolt in the first area. There's a sequence of 4 propeller platforms, with the third one being the way to actually reach the bolt. If players miss it, they can jump back onto the lower 4th platform in order to eventually reach the 3rd platform and then attempt this again. In the Saturn version, there's 3 of these propeller platforms, and it's the final one that gets high enough for players to reach the bolt. If they miss the bolt, with the win factor, the platform is too far away for players to reach, and they'll end up dying if they try to jump back to make up for the mistake. In fact, looking at this side by side, it looks like the Legacy Collection has an added platform snuck into the gap that exists in the Saturn version. So I'm not entirely sure which way this went. Did the developers design the game to be a little more challenging, a la the Sega Saturn version, and then decide some of these elements were a little too much, so toned it down for the PlayStation version? Or was it the opposite? Did they decide the game wasn't challenging enough, so they slightly tweaked some of the challenges? I'm inclined to think the latter was the case, simply because the Saturn version was released a month after the PlayStation version. Plus, the Saturn version includes 2 additional boss fights, one being optional, that are completely absent from the PlayStation version, making the Saturn version feel more definitive. I mean, as another example, take a look at the mid-level stage. In the Saturn version, there's a warning siren and occasional flashing red light that's notably absent in the PlayStation version. It's the type of detail that's typically added later on in the game development process as it's optional, and here it's only in the Saturn version. Of the 2 boss battles, the first of these is against Cutman from Mega Man 1. Cutman is pretty simple here, and I'd argue even easier than his Mega Man 1 iteration. He only has 1 attack, and that's throwing his boomerang-like scissors off of his head at Mega Man. Otherwise, he'll occasionally walk or jump towards the player. Another fun note is that it looks like his run cycle is Mega Man's original run cycle from the prototype of the game, so I'm glad to see the team still got some use out of it. While he is, I'd say, maybe overly easy, he also is completely optional and an out-of-the-way fight players can find in the halfway stage. So as a fun little Easter egg, I think it works just fine. Also, I'm not sure how many players would be looking for an ultra-challenging fight just to find a simple bolt. It feels like you'd probably want to reserve something like that for something more special. The other boss battle is against Woodman, and actually mandatory in Searchman Stage. After reaching the halfway point of Searchman Stage in the PlayStation version, players will simply move on to the second half of the stage. However, in the Saturn version, Woodman is a brand new sub-boss players will have to defeat in order to reach the second half of the stage. Like Cutman before, I'd say he's actually an easier version of Woodman from Mega Man 2, or at least an easier version compared to the Woodman of the North American hard mode. I say that because his moveset is pretty much identical. Encircle himself with a shield of leaves, toss it, then leap towards the player while leaves fall from the sky. But the leaves themselves are easier to jump over in this version. Like Cutman, this serves as a nice little Easter egg and callback, and it's still a fun fight, just Mega Man 8ified. With every boss defeated, it's time to head into Wily Tower. Wily Tower in Mega Man 8 resembles Mega Man 7, with there being 3 stages, 3 primary bosses, and then a boss rush that leads into Dr. Wily. Also similar to Mega Man 7, after finishing each stage, players will have a chance to head back to levels for things they missed or purchase items at the shop. As I've always preferred playing the Robot Master stages over the Dr. Wily stages, this is a choice that aligns with my preferences, although I'm sure there are Dr. Wily stage lovers out there who would be disappointed by this. With Wily Tower, the team decided to lean further into the alternate gameplay concepts of prior stages for better or worse. So what you get is a Wily Tower Stage 1 that's mostly a challenging snowboard sequence, a Wily Tower Stage 2 that's mostly a shmup, and a Wily Tower Stage 3 that finally entirely consists of more traditional Mega Man platforming challenges. I have a feeling that the most loathed of these is Stage 1, which brings the airboard back for a far more challenging sequence than what we saw before in Frostman's stage. I get the idea. We're breaking into Wily's tower, and this is a fun and new way to break in, and on top of that, it's the game trying to test you on all of your skills, with this sequence being the ultimate test in how well you can react, or memorize the sequence if you're struggling. But I don't find the snowboard segments all that fun, and really, I would have much rather have seen something that forced players to use their abilities for traversal. We get a little bit of that at the end of Stage 1, where players need to use the Thunderclaw, but it's also far more forgiving than the snowboard sequence. Generally speaking, that's a critique I lay at all of Wily Tower. Mega Man 8 finally has players use boss abilities for traversal, the second half of the game somewhat plays into that, and this would have been the perfect opportunity to go all out with boss ability traversal challenges. Yet, while there are some throughout the Wily Tower, they're few and far between. The team definitely wanted to do something different by utilizing the snowboard and shmup sequences, so I applaud them for trying something new. But what's by far the most interesting concept is the boss weapon traversal, so it feels to me like the team chose the wrong new concept to play with during the final tests. While the snowboard sequence of the first stage feels like a big miss, the shmup sequence of Stage 2 is a lot more fun, with some added challenges playing with the new auto-scroll where players will need to quickly make it through a maze-like stage layout, otherwise be crushed. Once again, I don't think anything about this shmup section is particularly challenging, but it still feels fun to blast away at enemies with all of the various power-ups players can find. While the third stage is the most traditional Dr. Wily stage, it's pretty short and also fairly simple. The only real concept the team played with was the various timed bombs, but it's nothing we hadn't seen before. Still, it works as a decent challenge, with the most interesting bit being the final portion of the time bombs, where an enemy waits to throw a giant rock at players. Something I didn't realize at first was this actually creates a new platform and is what's needed to proceed without relying on boss abilities. So, at first I ended up using my tornado hold and iframes to move forward through this, but once I realized the real solution, I really enjoyed it. In fact, I like both solutions, and I wish we'd seen more of both of these. The enemies throwing rocks to create a path is a fun idea, and I think a lot of unique challenges could have been made from this. All in all, I found the Wily Tower to be pretty lacking. On the plus side, every stage feels completely unique because they're all separate challenges from one another, but as I mentioned, it would have been nice to see the boss ability traversal mechanics used far more here. As per usual, each stage has a unique boss, with Stage 3 also bringing back Bass as a sub-boss. The first boss you'll face off against is the Atetemino. The boss will lower down on a thread alongside 2 weapon silos and a crate full of weapon recharges. The Atetemino itself doesn't have too strong of an attack, with the fight really being about dealing with the crates and silos that drop down, as this is what's most likely to actually damage the player. Once the Atetemino is almost dead, a fake Atetemino will take up one of the 4 spaces instead of a silo, and if it's hit, will drop, explode, and create a shockwave. Because the Atetemino is tucked up in a corridor, the ideal way to attack it is the Mega Ball, even though you'd think Tornado Hold would be its weakness. What results is a great and unique boss fight where players will need to figure out the correct position and angle to attack with the Mega Ball. The one downside is that it's far easier if players know to hold up in order to get a steeper kick, and there's a pretty strong chance many players might not have ever figured this out, as it's never required. I don't think that's automatically bad, and it's okay with me if final challenges require this sort of knowledge, as it really is supposed to be the final test. It somewhat reminds me of how Dr. Wily in Mega Man 4 is a far easier fight if you know that you can destroy the drill bomb by pressing the attack button as it's shooting, which is something I never knew until making these videos. The fights are still possible to win without the knowledge, but more challenging, and I think that's the key to making them still feel fair. The second boss you'll fight in Wily Tower is the Bliking, which is a shmup boss. This is actually the second shmup boss we've seen, with the first technically being the Shiriko Dagame sub-boss of Tengu Man stage, who's so incredibly simple as it telegraphs its 2 attacks, I honestly didn't think needed a section to be discussed. The Bliking is slightly more challenging. It's consistently armored and will only reveal its weak points as it attacks, with the attacks consisting of various projectiles players will need to either avoid and/or attack. It has 4 sections to it, and once players destroy those sections, they no longer attack. It's nothing unique I haven't seen several times in the shmup genre, but that's because it works. It's a fun concept, and destroying a piece of something that's attacking you feels immediately rewarding. It does make the fight easier as it progresses, but it's refreshing to have that change up every now and then, rather than a fight that only gets more challenging as you progress. Overall, this boss is pretty simple, and there's not too much to say on it other than Astro Crush will absolutely obliterate it, as it can hit all of the segments at once. In Wily Tower Stage 3, players will have to square off against Bass utilizing the Evil Energy. With the Evil Energy, he fuses with Treble, and the 2 become Super Bass. Super Bass will float back and forth across the top of the screen, and has 3 attacks. His first attack is charging up a beam that he'll shoot at the ground as he flies towards the player. His second, and probably most difficult attack to avoid, will see him charge up then shoot at the sky, with projectiles then falling from it to the ground. While they're always in the same location, and thereby especially readable after you've seen the attack once, there's only a small window to avoid them. His third and final attack will see him land on the ground, then shoot a series of 2 projectiles at Mega Man, which players should be able to fairly easily jump over. Each attack has a fairly long tell, and then a pretty specific skill check, so this fight is much less reactionary and really more about, can you quickly slide away? Can you time out jumping over a fireball pattern? Can you avoid something falling from the sky? So long as you can do 2 of these, you should be able to destroy Bass, even if you struggle with one of them, like the falling from the sky attack. I think the fight is fine for what it is, but I also find it less interesting than the final Bass and Treble fight from Mega Man 7. Here, he feels a little more robotic, in a way, as his pattern is so simple. Fly left and right, then attack 1, 2, or 3, then repeat. Whereas Bass from Mega Man 7 sees him flying all over the screen with a far more dynamic combination of movement and attack. Yes, he also has a repeating pattern, but the movements are more interesting, requiring more from the player, and his loop consists of 3 different attacks. These 2 fights are actually pretty interesting to look at side by side, as they're such different approaches. Bass and Treble utilizes dynamic movements and a loop of 3 attacks, while Super Bass has a reset phase where he moves back and forth before randomly choosing one of 3 attacks. Across a game, as a whole, I think it's nice to have a mix-up of these types of boss fights. But in a vacuum, which do you prefer? I lean towards Bass and Treble as it feels more dynamic, and even though it has a pattern, it still feels like it has a much more reactionary element to it, which adds a level of intensity to the fight. For finishing Wily Tower 3, players will come across the Yellow Devil, or Green Devil, this guy again. For Mega Man 8's take on the Green Devil, the fight now includes more variety. While the Yellow Devils of the past would form, attack Mega Man after being formed while its eyeball was exposed, and then would cross the screen in one or two ways in the case of Mega Man 3, with that crossing of the screen being its main attack, the Green Devil might cross the screen in a similar way, although far slower and easier to avoid. It may sink into the ground then re-emerge on the other side without really doing an attack. The eyeball that controls it may cause it to perform a tidal wave across the screen, which players will need to run away from, or the eyeball may fly across the screen, magnetizing the goop towards it from a sewer below, causing a spike attack. Instead of shooting players once it fully forms, like the Yellow Devils of the past, the Green Devil simply acts as a barrier to protect its eyeball controller, with players needing to rapidly shoot and chip away at the barrier in order to be able to attack the eye. The barrier will eventually reform, and players will need to go through the process again. As such, the optional laser shot upgrade is really ideal here, as it can immediately destroy the shield portion covering the eyeball. Otherwise, get ready for a lot of button mashing. And it's exactly this button mashing that makes the Green Devil a fairly annoying boss to fight if you don't have the laser upgrade. I actually like that it has more variety than the Yellow Devil, as while I find the Yellow Devil to be an interesting challenge that can actually feel pretty intense to me if I'm not using its weakness, it also gets a little old and boring after a while. But the Green Devil, thanks to its constant attack change-ups, feels a little more fresh, even if the way to attack it can feel repetitive. Something I didn't know until watching Mr. Cab 55 for Mega Man 8's Games Done Quick speedrun is that the Green Devil can be pretty quickly obliterated by swapping between the Flash Bomb to destroy the shield and then the Thunderclaw to attack the eye. Swapping between weapons for each part is something I hadn't thought to do, and I do think that's a fun strategy, especially with how much Mega Man 8 does encourage weapon swapping throughout. So, it's an annoying fight for those of us who like to play Mega Buster only, but a cool design idea that plays on utilizing the various boss weapons for, well, pretty much everybody else. The fourth and final stage of Mega Man 8 is the standard boss rush, with players needing to once again square off against all of the Robot Masters before duking it out against Dr. Wily. I've touched on the boss rushes in previous videos, so I don't have anything new or different to add here. Make it through the boss rush, and players will come up against Wily Machine 8. In this iteration of the Wily Machine, Wily will pretty much stay still in the same spot, with his main weapon being a spinner that will either shoot horizontal projectiles, lob out projectiles that will fall to the floor then shockwave out when they hit the ground, spin out towards the player as a melee attack, or bounce out towards the player. Each one has its own specific tell, meaning it shouldn't be too hard to avoid these when the player knows what to look for. Additionally, Wily Machine 8 will occasionally open up its mouth to charge a powerful blast attack. This is probably the most interesting of Wily Machine 8's attacks, because the player can actually stop this one. The two methods I'm aware of are by using Swordman's Flame Sword while grounded, as players will swing it upwards and snap the mouth back shut. The other is Astro Crush, which also seems to do the trick of closing Wily Machine's mouth. Apparently, the Mega Buster also works to close Wily Machine 8's mouth, which I didn't know, and I had to look up a playthrough by Minoru Leo to check out. I tried Mega Buster only on my own, and didn't realize this, as I guess you have to rapid fire the open mouth in order to get it to close. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. While the idea of the open mouth charging and shooting a powerful beam out with players being able to close the mouth by being proactive is a good one, I don't think it's immediately obvious that you can close up the mouth by any means. It's not like this is something we'd seen before, and it feels like one of those things you'd have to experiment around with to notice. Like, maybe people who choose to use Flame Sword or Astro Crush accidentally stumble upon it, and stumbling on it as a Mega Buster player feels like an accident, because I know when I was playing, my only thought was I should target Dr. Wily's weak spot, which is his window. This is a good concept, but I do think there needs to be something a little more to telegraph to players that this is possible. That aside, the mix of the charge attack with the spinning wheel is a good one, as it creates two distinct and different things players need to consistently watch out for. The spinning wheel creates a constant barrage of attacks for players to avoid, while the charge attack gives players the occasional break, and then becomes incredibly pressing to deal with as soon as it begins charging, which creates a nice push and pull in terms of how players need to tackle this boss fight. After destroying Wily Machine 8, Dr. Wily will enter his second phase with the return of the Wily Capsule, this time being called Wily Capsule Great. Although, is it great? Wily Capsule 4 from Mega Man 7 was far more efficient at murdering you. While former Wily Capsules would disappear, reappear, and then do the same one attack over and over again, Wily Capsule Great changes it up with 4 different possible attacks. He could do an attack similar to Mega Man 7, where a number of energy projectiles will home in on the player. He could do an attack similar to Mega Man 5, where energy projectiles will spin around him and retract back in. He could do an attack similar to Mega Man 6, where the energy projectiles spin around him, then shoot out to the edges of the screen at an angle. Or finally, he might shoot energy beams up to the sky, which will then come back down to the ground at where Mega Man's standing, causing a shockwave when it hits. Unlike Mega Man 7, where the homing attacks feel nearly impossible to dodge, the homing attacks here can be challenging to dodge, but still feel far more feasible. All of the other attacks also feel reasonably feasible to dodge, while still being challenging. What this results in is a fight that actually feels more balanced, while still maintaining that nail-biting feeling. Because the attack he chooses is random, players will always have to be on their toes for what the next possible attack could be. But while this could make the fight more difficult, they all have a reasonable window for avoiding them, making for a fun fight. I also don't think this fight can be too challenging. Whereas in Mega Man 7, players had 4 E-tanks plus a special tank that could be used to fully heal, in Mega Man 8, as players are limited to 1 use of the Rush Charger, which in and of itself isn't as good of a healing item as it doesn't instantaneously heal players, but drops health randomly over time players will have to reach, this is a fight that really should feel toned down from Wily Capsule 4. In essence, players have less health, so the fight needed to be balanced for that. When I think about it, this actually might be my favorite of the Wily Capsule fights so far, thanks to changing its attack pattern up, but still feeling fair. For defeating Dr. Wily, Wily once again begs for forgiveness. While Mega Man has finally wised up to the fact that Wily is given the exact same excuse 8 times in a row now, evil energy stops Mega Man from doing anything about it, like he attempted to do in Mega Man 7, meaning Duo has to save the day and extract the evil energy from Mega Man. I kind of would have liked to have seen Mega Man briefly turn evil from the energy and attempt to murder Dr. Wily, or fighting the evil energy internally, but instead he just passes out. After Duo saves him, he has to return to his mission in outer space, but leaves Proto Man a parting message for Mega Man to wake up to.
Mega Man, I have a message to give you from Duo.
From Duo? What is it?
He said, thank you.
Duo?
That's it! Okay. Apparently that was worth swelling up with emotion to, I guess. Some fun things about this ending, though, are that when Duo is saving Mega Man, he somehow glimpses into Mega Man's memories, and we get to see some extra scenes of Mega Man fighting off crime and saving the day. I also like when Mega Man wakes up in Dr. Light's lab, we get to see the Mega Man family of Dr. Light, Roll, Eddie, and Otto animated. And that's it. Roll the credits. In a fun change up here, the credits showed the original artwork the various Robot Masters were based on from the Robot Master boss contest Capcom always rolled out for Mega Man. I wish we got to see this for every Robot Master, and I definitely appreciate seeing that here. They also show some other contest entries they must have enjoyed throughout the rest of the credits, and I don't know why they never used this Flailman design, because it is awesome. Mega Man 8 is the single game from the Mega Man franchise I've warmed up the most to from doing these retrospective design videos. It actually started off as one of my least favorite Mega Man games, but in replaying it for this video and thinking about what the team was trying to do, I've actually come to really like the game. It's actually the reverse of what happened to me with Mega Man 5, where I started off thinking that was one of my upper tier favorites, but it ended up dropping down. While similar to Mega Man 7, I still don't like the idea of dropping the number of Robot Masters players can face right off the bat from 8 to 4. I think it's far more justified here. I really like what the team did with the Robot Master weapons aiding in Traversal, and it was nice to see the second set of stages actually require players to utilize this. It was also a fantastic choice to let players shoot their normal Mega Buster shot while having a weapon equipped, and have an alternate button use the equipped weapon. I also think the bolt, shop, and upgrade system of Mega Man 8 is a really clever concept, and I like the various ways the team tried to come up with interesting upgrades to Mega Man. On top of that, pretty much all of the bosses are really well designed here, with a strong variety of unique fights that all stand on their own. But I still do hold some major critiques of Mega Man 8. I don't know if it's Mega Man's size or the new 3/4 view, but Mega Man does feel absolutely sluggish in Mega Man 8, and he doesn't feel as good to play as in previous games. On top of that, most of the stages I honestly feel could use improvement. A lot of the challenges aren't all that interesting, or there are strong concepts, but then they're never really fleshed out to their full potential. The alternate gameplay ideas, while novel, didn't work for me. I like shmups, but I don't like being forced to play shmup sequences in Mega Man. It makes the levels they're in feel much longer than they are, and thinking about replaying Tengu Man stage in case I missed any bolts there made me groan. Not because I disliked it, but because I didn't want to have to replay the entire shmup section all over again. The snowboard concept is pretty universally disliked, and I think for good reason. Prompts telling you to jump or slide to avoid an instant death just isn't very fun. And this idea isn't just used once, but 3 times, if you count both Frostman stage sequences. I absolutely adore puzzles and room escape games, but the puzzle sequence in Astro Man stage is simply boring. And honestly, I'm still not the biggest fan of the music in 8 compared to the others, and that does affect my biased opinion, even though some of the tracks have definitely grown on me while working on this. Mega Man 8 is a bit of a shame, because there are a lot of interesting ideas that I feel like needed to be fleshed out and explored further. It's one of those things where I would have loved to have seen a new Mega Man game take what worked from Mega Man 8 and really run with it all the way to see what kind of game could have been made. A game where boss abilities are frequently used for secrets and traversal, and a game with an interesting shop filled with unique upgrades. So it's sad to me then that this would end up being completely dropped afterwards with the upcoming Mega Man 9 due to the retro revival craze. And look, my favorite classic Mega Man games are 2 and 3, so I was beyond stoked for 9, and I know that the game has its own massive fan base. So I'm not trying to take away from Mega Man 9. The point is that I feel like I see a lot of potential for Mega Man 8, and it's just a shame that all of the ideas were dropped. To be fair, I haven't played Mega Man in base, which I know some people refer to as Mega Man 8.5, so if that's something you'd like to see me eventually do a video on, let me know. Placing Mega Man 8 in my ranking chart of the various Mega Man games ranked amongst themselves, which is all my personal opinion, of course, I'm going to give it a B rank. Which is funny, because a long time ago, I probably would have told you I thought of it as a D, and when I initially made this list last year, I ranked it as a C. But, like I said, the more I play it, the more I appreciate it. If you missed them, this is the 8th episode in my series analyzing Mega Man's 1 through 11. So if you enjoyed, I'd love if you checked out some of the previous ones, as I put a huge amount of work into all of these. I also started a similar series for Sonic the Hedgehog, if you're interested. I've also been working on my own game over the past few years, ChivalBee. It's an action platform game with some elements inspired by Mega Man, like a non-linear stage select. We still have a long way to go, but if it looks at all interesting to you, we'd love if you followed us on YouTube or social media for updates. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.